Everybody, to the March 20, 2018 Board of Selectmen meeting. We tell everybody, every time we meet, that we are being video recorded, so just be forewarned. And we always start with a moment of appreciation for our troops who are serving around the world, so please join me in a moment. Thank you. And then we're announcing that Representative Sean Dooley, who represents the south side of town, is holding spring office hours April 12, 11:30 to 12:30 at the center. And lastly, that we're going to have an executive session at the close of this meeting to discuss pending litigation and land acquisition. And so now for the fun stuff. The Chief of Police, 7 o'clock, and our new sergeant.
Wow, very punctual.
Well, almost.
Well, good evening. This is a very simple, straightforward, happy event. Officer Colby Roy was promoted by you folks several weeks ago to the rank of sergeant. So we thought we would have a public pinning of him, even though it's been pinned to him for a few weeks now. We have some visitors here with us also, Chief Chris Safire from Millis, who we worked with quite a bit. And somewhere back there, I believe, noticing the helmet, it must be Motor Officer Al Manganello of the Walpole Police Department is with us. Yep, it is. And
Formerly of the Medfield Police Department.
formerly of the Medfield Police Department. Yes, don't anyone get any other ideas. They've got enough motor officers over there now, just fine. We have deputy chief, sergeants, patrol officers, a collection of people here from Medfield. And Colby has some of his family members here who he will introduce when he comes up. And a young lady who he will also introduce is going to do the pinning. It's been practiced. It's going to go flawlessly and bloodlessly.
Excellent, excellent.
Sergeant Roy, come on up here, please. You feel like you're back in the academy again? Square in your corners? Very, very appropriate. If you want to introduce any members of your family, that'd be great.
My parents are here, my father Paul, my mother Charlotte over there, my girlfriend's sister-in-law Vicky, and 3 boys over there, my little buddies, Ricky, Will, and Joe, and then obviously countless co-workers and family members and friends that are all here, and my girlfriend Jen over there that's going to be hopefully not stabbing me in the chest.
And the young gentleman, very appropriately attired in blue.
Yes.
Nice job, good planning. Jen, come on up. Sergeant Roy is a Medfield High success story, and even better than that, he played rugby. So, good stuff. Good stuff. I don't know, we may work on that, it's a potential. Sure. Jen, please go right ahead and enjoy the moment. Nice job. Thank you very much to the Board of Selectmen for your support in our endeavors to make the police department as good as we possibly can. Sergeant Roy has been doing a great job. There is no probationary period, but everything went fine. When I was in New Zealand, I heard nothing about any ruckuses that he caused, so very pleased with that. So, thank you, and we will adjourn to the next room if anyone would like to take any photos and whatnot. Congratulations, Sergeant.
Good luck.
Congratulations.
That was fun. To do some nice stuff. So we'll just give them a second to clear out of the room so that we can hear you better. Okay, so we'll go on with our meeting then. All right, we'll have Eagle Scout candidate Kalilan, is that how you say it?
Kalian.
Caleb Sheehy, Troop 89, request permission for Eagle Scout project. Thank you for coming. Thanks for doing
you.
an Eagle Scout project.
Good evening, everyone. As you just heard, my name is Kalian Sheehy. I'm a Life Scout here in Troop 89 in Medfield, and tonight I'm here to present my Eagle Scout project that I've been working on for the last several months, chiefly in conjunction with Medfield's own Historical Society. So my project proposes that we put up QR codes on some of the historic grounds and buildings here in Medfield. Here in Medfield, we're privileged enough to have 6 historic sites that are on the National Registry of Historic Places, as well as several other additional sites that have a wonderful, rich history in Medfield. So the basis for my project is that, you know, as younger generations of people move into Medfield, and as the world, you know, gets increasingly based in technology, we want to make sure that people still remember the history of what came before them here in Medfield. So basically, originally I wanted to help out the town, and my passion is in history and public speaking, so that led me to coming up with this project. You know, for example, if you have a family that's going to a historical site, they might not necessarily have time to read a pamphlet, which can cause a trash problem. They want to have information that's on the go. And so that initial idea led me to working with the Medfield Historical Society, and I developed this. So this is a QR code, and when you scan a QR code like this, it pulls up 2 things. One is it's going to take you to a website, either the the Historical Society's website or the organization's website.
Could I make a suggestion that you hand that to the town council, maybe Mark Sorrell, and he could hold it
Sure.
on the front of your podium there or somewhere, just so that Medfield TV can focus on it?
So initially, yeah,
Thanks,
that
Mark.
was what I came up with.
How long do I have to do this?
I don't know.
I think it's upside down, Mark.
When you pull up the website with the QR code by scanning it on your phone, it'll have audio information about the historic building, along with a brief paragraph surrounding the history of that building. But there's one tiny problem with this specific QR code. And it's that, well, you know, a black and white design like this is not going to look nice on something like the town hall, for example. So that led me to my next idea. And this really nails it. So this is a prototype QR code. Ah, there we go. It's a prototype QR code. Basically, this was done with the Medfield Public Library's very own 3D printing. The 3D sort of styled QR code you see there was the work of them. And they've agreed to help me print these QR codes out. I just have to supply the cost and materials, which is only $30. And the Medfield Historical Society has pledged money to make sure that all my costs are covered here. So there's a couple changes to this prototype. Number 1, we're going to be using weather-resistant vinyl that can be stained so that it looks more like wood or whatever surface that you'd like it to match on. These 3D printed QR parts are going to be painted by our very own scouts. Everything's going to be assembled by the scouts as an Eagle Scout project requires. And we will be putting up the QR codes on the historic buildings. We currently have 8. 1 is currently pending. The other 7 property owners have all pledged their support and approval, including the historic commissions that manage some of those buildings, like the Dwight Derby House or Vine Lake Cemetery. And so basically, with that in mind, I hope that you'll support my project. Does anybody have any questions?
Are those made with the 3D printers?
Yes. So the back plate is going to be made out of vinyl, but the actual parts there, you see the 3D sort of QR code, that's all going to be made at Medfield Public Library's 3D printer.
Mhm.
Yes.
Maybe we'll get them all done.
Yes. So an update, I guess, on the project I can give you right now is that as soon as the snow melts, which unfortunately that might not happen, but in the coming weeks, I plan to work with the property owners on proposed places we could put the QR code on their property. I'll send them a photo. I'll offer to meet with them personally so that we can, I can negotiate where this QR code would be best on their property. So that's really the status of this project now. I have all the approvals lined up for the project up to that specific date. It's just about installation and getting this stuff manufactured.
So if you had those in a box in the middle of the winter, you pulled them out of your car and started to carry them to the first building, and you slipped on the ice and they all went flying and they came out in a pile, how do you know which one goes to which house?
So every single QR code is unique. No two, just like snow. No two, snowflakes, no two QR codes are alike. So all I would have to do is just pull out my trusted Boy Scout survival cell phone, scan the QR code, and I should be able to listen to the audio recording on the website, read the text, and figure out which building it matches to.
Okay, so one more question, follow-up then. These are all going on buildings?
That's correct, or grounds of buildings. They might not be directly on the buildings. We might have a cedar post that's adjacent.
So here's where my head, this is a suggestion, this is not a challenge to what you're doing. If this were to grow, so I'm actually thinking, gee, if this is a good thing, it sure sounds like a good thing to me, and it might be something that over time, other Eagles or other, Girl Scouts or whoever might want to add to it. It might be useful to put these up on places in town that are not buildings, but that are sites of historic events. But if that were the case, I'm almost saying, gee, is there a way to put a title so people know what the thing is, rather than just having to kind of take the chance that maybe it's interesting?
Right. So by default, the text here on that plaque
Yeah.
would say Historic Medfield. However, if the building name or the site name is short enough, Peak House, for example, would fit great on the plaque.
Yeah.
There might be issues with fitting some of the longer names, like Dwight Derby House. Might not fit there.
Okay.
But we will do our best to make sure that when you scan the code, it will immediately tell you what you're looking at and why the history matters and why it's important.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Who created the websites with the text and the audio?
Yeah. So I am working in close, proximity with the Medfield Historical Society. I will be contacting their webmaster in the immediate future, and I will be, helping to update their website and get it ready for this sort of project. Other organizations like the Dwight Derby House and Vine Lake Cemetery have asked the QR codes to link to their app or their website, and I've been working with them to make sure that that happens.
So I think this is an absolutely brilliant idea. I
you.
love it. I think it's going to be great for the town. We're fortunate that we have such a critical mass of historic houses and buildings in Medfield. I've often thought that we could almost become a destination for people that are interested in history, and this is how to make it accessible to them. This is great.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the Dwight Derby House, the Peak House. Do you have the other 6 in your mind?
Yes. So other places, First Baptist Church,
Yeah, great.
First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church, Vine Lake Cemetery, Dwight Derby, George Innes Art Studio, that's pending. I'm currently working with Mr. Thompson,
Yeah.
who's the property custodian there, and I hope that he'll reach out to me in the coming weeks and we can get that on board. Kingsbury Grist Mill, Lowell Mason House, and the Medfield Historical Society building. So those will be the 8 sites that we currently have on board with the project.
That's great. So that I'm thinking about expanding your project, and that if the homeowner up here on Main Street has a historic house, and they're interested, it would be nice if you could kind of institutionalize what you've done, so that if you went to college or something and couldn't continue on doing it, that someone else could.
Yes, so the webmaster for the Medfield Historical Society and my dad will actually be helping maintain these QR codes. This stuff should last a long time. The 3D printer, the vinyl, I'm not worried about that.
Yep.
If people wanted to, get involved with the project and, there's plenty of other sites here in Medfield. So,
Absolutely.
unfortunately, there's still some time. If people wanted to reach out, I'm willing to work with them, and we can get, it would be really nice if we were able to integrate more sites. And in the future, once the Historical Society gets up to date, if there's someone who knows the 3D printing process and there's another scout who wants to do this, I trust that they should be able to pick up where I leave off.
I just have one other question. Where do the scanning codes come from? Who creates them?
Yes. So there is actually free software, free websites you can go to on the internet to get a QR code generated. They're very easy to generate. With this 3D printing stuff and how we got the QR code to be like styled in a 3D way like this, that was actually done with custom software that my dad and I made. And essentially what it does is it takes, a 2D picture like this, and it can turn it into a 3D sort of mapped out thing like this. And so basically, if someone wanted to be able to do that and, keep this project alive in the future, that's definitely, it wouldn't be that hard to replicate.
Okay. So I don't know if the QR codes are like the barcodes, but there's actually an international organization that is in charge of all the barcodes in the whole world, and I bet you there is one for the QR codes as well, and that they administer the barcodes, I know, and the RFID tags too, I think.
So with regards to the QR codes, I'm sure that there is probably some organization. I haven't looked into that too deeply yet. However, what I can say is that these QR codes are basically unique identifiers.
Yep.
They're assigned to whatever you assign them to. And they do not expire, and I don't think that they can be reassigned. So that really shouldn't end up being a problem long term.
They're like snowflakes. Everyone is different.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, could we have the other scouts, who I assume are helping you on this project, introduce themselves so we'll know who they are?
Sure. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Well, I'm Michael Einam. I'm Alex Munch. I'm Dylan Corbett.
Awesome. So these guys are also taking part in the citizenship in the communications merit badge, and so it's really good to get them involved, and I hope to have as much scout support and community support as possible for this project.
So in addition to my liking your idea a whole lot, I'm very impressed with your public speaking abilities. So thank you for coming here, thank you for sharing, and thank you for your project. And good luck.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Were you his communications merit badge counselor? Okay.
Let's see, so it's time for citizen comment. I assume no one signed up again.
I've not had anybody sign up today.
And we have two new action items that got added since we circulated the agenda last week. Vote to approve proposed July 1, 2018 to June 30, 2019 health insurance rates for active employees.
Do we have a choice?
Yeah, those are the rates the Insurance Advisory Committee has been negotiating, and they are anxious to get going so they can start converting them for the new fiscal year.
Can you just give us a thumbnail sketch of what's going on, what they are, what the rates?
Yeah, we have the retiree plans you voted to approve in December because they changed with Medicare in January. The rates for the active employees changed July 1st with the fiscal year. So we have an HMO, a PPO, and this year we're adding a high deductible plan with a health savings account, which is a federal legislation. The town is going to contribute $600 matching to employees who sign up for an individual and $1,200 for a family. And there will be savings for both the town and the employees who signs up for these plans.
Is there a sort of an average rate that we can tell people that they're going up, Mike?
3.95%.
Okay, great.
So we've had very good experience, and that would have been the rate increase with or without the plan, but we're hoping with the plan will help keep the rates down in future years. So
That's not a bad rate. That's a pretty low rate increase for health insurance.
it is. But on the other hand, the total budget is up 9.1% because we've had 22 people sign up for the HMO over the past year. Plus, we're not sure because the open enrollment period for this plan is until May. So we had to take a guesstimate as to how many would sign up. So it is a big jump, and that's one of the reasons. We get about 3%. Actually, this year, with the state revenues less than, they're going up 1.3% cherry sheet. So we're only getting about probably 2.5% or less. And yet we have pensions are up 9.2%. This is up 9.1%. So that's why it's so difficult. People don't understand why the town can't live within its means, but when you're dealing with increases like that,
Yep.
it's very difficult to balance a budget.
More and more of the expense of running the town is getting transferred to the property tax, basically. The state aid is just not going up.
Proposition 2.5, we're paying more now as a share of our property tax than we did before 2.5 was passed. And the federal government, which when I started work here eons ago, was they used to have something called federal revenue sharing. They help with the cost of building wastewater treatment plants and water lines. They've dropped all of that, and they mandate, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and it doesn't come with any money. So they've shifted the cost onto the cities and towns and private employers also, so they can look like they're doing a wonderful job down in Washington spending our money. But they push the cost on to local government, and it's a shame. It would be one thing if they were paying their bills, but they're running up an incredible tab. And these guys are someday going to be paying the bills that this generation has run up, and it's unfortunate. So, and with that, I'll get off my soapbox.
You need a motion to approve the
We
health
need a
insurance
motion,
rates?
we do.
Yes.
It's time for a
I
motion.
will move that we approve the health insurance rates for active employees for July 1, 2018 to July 30th, 2019.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Let's see, we're asked to vote to proclaim March 27 as Public Health Nurse Jean Sniffen Day in honor of her 20 years of service to Medfield. Vote to sign proclamation.
Right, the Board of Health has had the Natick VNA providing public health services under a contract for the past 20 years. Prior to that, we were under the Walpole VNA, and Natick VNA has decided to stop providing public health services to cities and towns, so actually we're going back to Walpole. So, but she did a wonderful job. She's a fine nurse, and
So she's,
we're going to miss
I
her.
just don't know her. She's a nurse with the Natick VNA? who's
Yes.
been here for 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. The Board of Health has a annual contract to provide.
Do you have a copy of the
Services.
proclamation?
It should be in your folder, I think, to be signed. If not, I'll see if I can dig it out if it's not in there.
Here we go.
Yep, there it is, yeah.
So I would move that we declare March 27th. Do I need to read this? Or?
You can if you want, yes. Yeah.
Read it. The vote as follows.
I don't think she'll hear it, but
No, well, she
She
can tune in
watches
on
the YouTube
thereafter.
video.
That's right.
you can watch it on YouTube.
So I move that we sign the proclamation as follows. Whereas Jean Sniffen, RN, has served the Medfield community for the past 20 years as its public health nurse, tending to the needs of its residents and employees, and whereas she performed these services as an employee of the Natick Visiting Nurses Association, and whereas Jean Sniffen conducted weekly clinics at Tilden Village, the center at Medfield, and the town hall conducting wellness clinics, taking blood pressure readings, and administering flu vaccine shots, and whereas Jean worked closely with the Council on Aging staff to promote the well-being of Medfield senior citizens, and whereas Jean has reached out to the Medfield community to inform them about critical health issues such as Lyme disease, flu epidemics, and opioid abuse, and whereas she participated in Medfield Day and other civic events to encourage participation in efforts to maintain a healthy and active lifestyle and good health habits. Now, therefore, be it resolved that, on the occasion of Jean Sniffen and the Natick Visiting Nurses Association ending their longtime collaboration with the Medfield Board of Health, the Medfield Board of Selectmen do hereby proclaim this 27th day of March in the year of our Lord 2018 to be Jean Sniffen Day, and we ask the residents of Medfield to join with us in extending our sincere appreciation to Jean for her efforts to maintain the good health and well-being of Medfield citizens. Voted this 20th day of March 2018 at Medfield in the county of Norfolk, Massachusetts. So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. So we're asked next to vote to authorize scope of services for subdivision of Hinckley property and senior center in the amount of $14,820. Mike, Chris, anybody gonna tell us about this, or?
Do you want me to speak to that?
Sarah, thank you.
You have a scope of services for subdivision for the Hinckley property. That would be to divide the Hinckley property in half wherever makes sense, and add a portion of the senior center parcel to create a lot that's suitable for disposition, to create housing. So I would work with PAR, our engineer, and the land surveyor to do that. And I think they said it was about a month turnaround time. So once the snow clears, the surveyor can go out and do the work.
And so we're hiring them because we can't wait for the county engineer, because it'll take too long.
Yes, I have not heard back from the county engineer from the request. Did you, Mike?
No, I haven't, no. And Sarah, you're also having an appraisal done, is that on?
It's a separate
What's the next thing?
ask
Oh, that, okay,
or agenda item.
okay.
Any further questions about this?
Yeah, Sarah, so this would get done in a month, but then we'll still wind up having to wait for a special town meeting to pass the disposition.
Yes, I think
And to
so.
pass the zoning.
Yes.
So it's nice this is getting done early, but we're still gonna be stuck with another town meeting. Okay.
Yes, one step in the process.
Right. I think it's the zoning process, the hearings, that is the longest piece of the.
Yeah, what I was getting at is if this was done quickly, does that do anything good for us around developing the property? But not really, because the real gate is the town meeting.
And COG is working on the zoning piece of it.
Yes. So they do the subdivision plan, and then it would go to the planning board for an approval not required endorsement, which is.
And this will
quick.
carve out, I think, that extra lot.
Yeah, yeah.
They'll create a new lot on a new plan.
We've got the,
Plan will go to record at the registry, and then there'll be something you can,
Yeah, I was just, given that this whole thing got pushed out longer than we thought it was gonna, I was just wondering if this helped us pull it in, but the answer's, I mean, it's a good thing, I'm glad we're doing it. but-
no, and the wetlands delineation that was done last spring can be part of this plan as well.
Okay.
Mark, when a board has care, custody, and control of property, they have to declare it surplus. Will the Council on Aging need to declare whatever property's being transferred to this parcel, will they have to declare it surplus?
the general answer to your question is yes. I was just trying to think back, because I went back and pulled the records. I believe that they, I'm not sure that the land itself was ever transferred to them as opposed to the building. There's no downside if they're willing to cooperate to do it.
Oh, yeah, I think this was their suggestion in part, so I don't think that should be a
Yeah,
problem.
I don't think there was ever a formal transfer of the entire lot to the COA. I think which is kind of was the building that was done. It wasn't.
Okay, so they don't have the care custody
I,
control.
it's kind of a
Yeah.
gray area. The prudent course would be to get them to do it anyway, particularly if they're willing to.
Okay.
And then, of course, it has to go to town meeting. They're the ones that actually make the disposition, so.
Right. Can you handle that, Mark, making sure that happens?
Yeah.
Council on Aging does whatever they need to do and all that's taken care of. Does that have to be done before we do the subdivision, Tara, or just before disposition?
I think before disposition.
Okay, so we can do all this without.
Well,
part of the
I would
process.
probably, go and check with them about where they see that line, but as far as the formal thing, I don't
We just
think
make sure
that's-
they're in the loop and we know that
Yes.
they need to approve it, and I think they will, because they want this to happen, and so.
Right.
But I think we should just make sure we don't have that that seems like a pretty easy thing to check off this particular list of to-do items.
And when this is redesignated, the rest of the Hinckley property, just the status is unchanged. Is that how
Right,
that
but
works?
and that'll be its own lot as well, so you can,
Well, that's what I was getting, it's just a lot in the sense that the land is designated, what I was getting
They'll
at
put an
is,
identifier on the various lots that are shown
Right.
on the plan.
lot one, lot two, lot one
Or
A.
A,
lot-
B.
Yeah.
okay.
But is that piece of it already zoned, or does that have to be rezoned as well, the single-family house lot that's being
Well, that would
created?
be a single-family house lot under the existing zoning.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's good, it's good to
Yes.
go. So we
Yeah.
could dispose of that as well,
Yeah.
as part of the same process.
Yes.
There was some talk about leaving the wetland area in the middle as a wildlife
Urban
corridor.
wild,
Urban wild?
Yes.
Is that a zoning district, or is that just
it's
a
a vernacular.
pedestrian?
You could put a conservation restriction in place too and accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, I think before we would do that, though, we'd want to know what we want to do with that land.
Right.
So as long as the rest of the Hinckley property, nothing's happening to it other than whatever's there, I think we want to keep the flexibility on that land until we figure out what we want to do with it.
Yeah, because if you put a conservation restriction on it, you're very, very difficult to remove later on, so.
As a practical matter, if it's a wetland resource, particularly under the state statute, there's nothing that's gonna be able to happen there anyway, so.
If it's a wetland, it's a restricted area, that's totally
Right.
different, but as opposed to, well, there's a lot of bushes here and we don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Let's make it urban wild, so, yeah, okay.
Any further questions? If not, do we have a,
I would move that we authorize the scope of services for the subdivision for the Hinckley property and senior center in the amount of $14,820.
Second.
any further discussion? All
I
those
just-
in,
Sorry, I want to add plus reimbursables. That wasn't in that, so if, just curious. Throw in there.
Plus reimbursement.
What's your estimate? How much is that?
Mileage, printing cost.
Coming from Rhode Island, so, Foxborough.
Not Los Angeles.
Presumably, it's gonna be modest
Okay,
reimbursement,
Okay.
so.
I'm fine with that.
so all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then the next item on our agenda is a vote to authorize appraisal of Lot 3
Yeah,
Ice House
I'm going to
Road.
ask to defer that till, then Mike and I have our next Lot 3 discussion.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
And then our next item,
I should have packed the lunch, I didn't realize we were gonna.
No, this one will be short. This is a short discussion.
well, promises. Next, we vote to authorize application for planning for housing production grant for the survey and water and sewer extension on Hospital Road. Is that you too, Sarah?
This is me.
Thank you.
So this is me coming to ask you to authorize a grant application to Mass Housing under their Planning for Housing Production grant round. It's a new grant round. The purpose of the ask is to fund 25% design services for roadway, water, and sewer extensions at the hospital. And I realize it may seem premature for me to come ask you because we only have an unaccepted draft master plan at this point. But this is a brand new pot of money that's available. It's $2 million over multiple years, but I wanted to come now so we could try to get in the queue. And it's meant to target barriers in development. So the maximum grant amount is $100,000 with a 10% local match. The quote that we got from PAR Engineering was $138,000. It was $100,000 for the roadway design and design services, water, sewer, and $38,000 for a survey plan of the hospital campus. And I was hoping that there was already a survey plan available. I'm not sure. It's going to take some more asking around, but it doesn't seem like there's that's available. But I
Of the
also,
hospital?
yeah, with the 2-foot contours, we have an A&R plan.
Judith Nitch did,
Yeah,
have you
we've
looked at those?
we've inquired there, and they don't have one.
okay.
However, they did indicate that they could do one easily using something called UAS, and I don't know what that means, but I wanted to sort of come to you guys, see,
And
get
ask
your
us what
your
UAS
te-
means?
No, yeah, well, with all your expertise, but no, to gauge your temperature on this notion before I did a lot of digging, because what I'm thinking, based on what they said, that they could easily do it, that maybe it doesn't cost $38,000 either.
Before you do metaphorical digging.
Yes. So I'm asking you now because believe that it would, if we do this work now over the next year, it would put us in a better position to be eligible for MassWorks infrastructure grant funding, which opens typically every year in August, and it could be worth millions of dollars in construction costs. So obviously, there's a lot of work to get there, and I'm not an expert in the engineering process. But I feel like it's an important ask. The financial model that's being worked on does not account for any grant funding, so it could mean real money. And starting now primes us for early value development in order to, within the development community, interest there, being able to unlock and expedite some of the cultural hub activities, live workspaces, unlock some commercial space, open up the cottage area for development, maybe group home live workspace. So those are my.
So Sarah, the scope, it sounds like it's a good thing, but so the scope in terms of what this would focus on, is it getting the water and sewer extension partway up, like say for the culture center, or is it the entire
It's for the
backbone?
entire backbone,
The entire backbone?
yes.
So what are we actually getting? We're getting a survey or?
We're getting a survey. Well, the scope is a survey plus 25% design drawings for the roadway and water and sewer extension. Roadway design and water and sewer design. And plus the survey plan, which is essential to have. So it goes above the $100,000 ask. So that's where I want to find some savings that the town would be responsible for.
But this is in the grant program for towns that have housing production plans. Is that right?
Yes, you should have a housing production plan, and you can't have subsidized housing inventory greater than 13%.
Okay.
So
So we're eligible.
we are eligible.
Right.
There's
And
just
so-
one actually grant round that we fit into.
Right. And so it would be, obviously, that with the idea that there would be affordable housing developed.
There's a component of, well, it's housing production, but there is an affordable component to it. They are looking for projects that implement your local housing production plan, so no one's telling you what to do and where to do it, and fair housing
And so we'd only have to come up with $13,800 if we got this grant.
Well, no, they're maxed at 100,000 with a 10% match. So I'm not sure if it means 90,000
Or 48,000.
or yes.
Okay. But would we have to do both pieces of it, or could we just do one piece of it? We'd have to do both?
No, we could. No, I think we need to do both pieces because you have to have the survey in order to do the design.
Okay, what's the deadline for applying for this grant?
Next Thursday,
Oh,
the
okay.
29th.
Certainly sounds like worthwhile to try to get it. I mean,
Yeah, sounds worth it to me.
There's nothing about this that would preclude, whatever we wind up doing there, if this is on the in the infrastructure, it may be that we need to have the intention to build housing there, which we do, in order to be a qualifying project, but there's nothing about the nature of what they do here that pre-specifies what we'd be
No.
able to do with the property.
No, we're not locked into
Okay.
anything.
Yeah, sure.
And I do believe the development process is going to take several years.
Yeah.
So, naturally.
Right.
May I also mention before you take questions, that last night the planning board discussed this and they were in unanimous support of the notion,
Oh, okay, that's useful to know.
since I see Teresa.
Steve, did you have anything you wanted to say on it?
Here to support the application. I think it's a great idea because we know it's a complicated job and this amount of design work would be really helpful in kind of jumpstarting the whole process. So, and I think what Gus just observed is right, that this doesn't really lock us into anything, but it helps us with some of that infrastructure plan goals.
Certainly seems to add value. Yes, Mr. Massaro?
I'd also point out that at least the town's expenditure ought to be an allowable cost under the share ratio as well. I mean, for $10,000, I mean, it's not a lot of, the way it works, but it is an allowable, should be an allowable cost depending on how you write the grant, to make sure it's clear that, it's for the hospital.
Yeah,
Yeah, and the cost might be 38,000 or 48,000, but
true.
still it's stuff that we need to have done probably, so. Any more questions from anybody?
So I would move that we vote to authorize the application for the Planning for Housing Production Grant for the survey and water and sewer extension on Hospital Road.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Sarah, thank you for
Thank you very much.
doing
I
that
appreciate
for us,
this.
for the town. Okay, our next item is discussion items, financial procedures and capital policy. And Mike, thank you for doing your draft.
Yeah, so I had circulated to both of you the beginning of a draft financial policy which focuses on capital spending and capital budgeting process. This grew out of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of months to figure out the financing of our capital expenditures and the recognition, or my view, that if we're gonna be doing this, we have to have kind of a set of procedures and commitments around how we're gonna handle it. And we can't just say, give us all this money and we'll figure out what we're gonna do down the road. But that if we are gonna be adopting a longer-term planning posture, we did need some sort of a written procedure around doing that and executing on that. And so what this tried to combine is institutionalization of the 20-year long-term capital building plan that Jerry McCarty developed, and being consistent with the new approach we're proposing to take with the Permanent Planning and Building Committee at town meeting this year, kind of putting them in charge of that, and then revamping a little bit the way the capital budgeting process has worked by focusing less on an annual kind of horse trading effort over a kind of somewhat arbitrarily determined amount of money that's available, and going to sort of more of a zero-based approach of starting with here's what we actually need to do, and then figuring out in advance what we can afford to pay for and what not, kind of over a 5-year period. 'Cause right now, we get requests, we have a 5-year capital, set of capital requests from town departments, but we don't do the prospective matching between those requests and the source of funds to pay for them. So if we do go down the road of the capital stabilization fund, that will free up some money that was previously used for kind of building repairs as needed in the existing capital budget for kind of other capital needs for roads, for example, based on Mo's analysis of the roads and vehicles and the rest of it. Is we're going to have a little bit more of a coordinated approach now, with the vehicle policy, the roads policy, and all that. So this was to try to take a crack at how we might approach that, and then also kind of just putting in, I mean, the reserves and free cash, as you know, is a particular hobby horse of mine. And so obviously that's just my personal opinion on the need for reserves, and people might have a disagreement with that. And then OPEB is just stating in a policy kind of what we've been doing, that this is sort of what our policy is. So I do think we'd need a similar set, hopefully not too long and not too detailed, but actionable procedures around the operating budgets, which in part are going to be, I think, a download from the brain of Mike Sullivan, in understanding how it is he goes about his procedure. You know, as we talked about, Gus, and kind of developing the estimates of the budgets. I think a lot of the things that Mike does kind of by rote and memory, we need to institutionalize some procedures about the policies we have and how we estimate state revenues, how we estimate throughout the process. I mean, those are things that Mike does for us. You know, and absent kind of uploading Mike's brain actually into some sort of hard drive or mainframe, we're probably better off writing it down.
I am not donating my brain to the town.
You need his hats.
Give it enough at this point, right? Kind of, yeah.
You need his hats.
Right.
The hats that he keeps the rabbits in.
Right, right. And so a lot of that is gonna be kind of figuring out, okay, here's how we go about it, kind of what he's been able to do, kind of as we've all seen, you and I have seen, Gus, in the work committee process. All right, here's what we say, here's how we base our estimates on revenue in each given year, so we can kind of have that, hopefully continue without we haven't had a lot of unpleasant surprises in that process, at least during the time I've been involved in the budgeting thing, but I don't think that's an accident necessarily, and so I do think we need to institutionalize that on the operating side, but the operating side can sort of wait till after town meeting, whereas the capital side, I think we have to have an agreement on an approach so that we can explain to town meeting, look, we're asking for this amount of money, whatever amount of money is, and here's how we're gonna go about making sure we're just doing it prudently and achieving its stated objective. That's it.
So, let me pass that up. I'm not sure we're gonna be ready at a town meeting to do what you're proposing here, so, I already gave one to Chris, if you get one back to Mark. There are several, first off, I may not fully, you know, this is intended not as a position against, this is more, I reacted to what you drafted, and I have a lot of comments, obviously, to what you drafted. Here's my bottom line reaction is that this is not yet well thought out well enough for us to move ahead. And what I'm deeply concerned about is whether the timing for this thing at this upcoming town meeting is a good idea. And that's a combination of anticipating that there'll be a school override potentially. There are some other articles that are overrides. The issue of $1 million for the feasibility plan for the Dale Street School is one issue by itself. But I think what we're trying to do is bundle these things all together to get a lot of things done at once. And that complexity, at least I haven't digested it in any way that gives me confidence that we're really headed down a good path. So what I did here, and we can either not bother to spend time now and just have a look at it and come back in the next meeting, but on the first page, I kind of wrote the 7 kind of bottom line, top, main points of my reaction to what I read here. And if we talk about anything, it should just be those. As you go through, you'll see I've got lots of comments that kind of map onto specific points that were made. So I would propose we not spend any time on that and
Yeah,
just
no,
take a look
I
at
think
it.
we should talk about it tonight.
Okay.
Because we've got to resolve this by next week.
Yeah, I don't think we can.
No,
So,
well,
but-
we have to resolve one way or the other.
Okay,
And
yeah,
so,
okay.
And I want to discuss it, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that we have to do
Okay.
it this
Well-
particular way, but I think we do have to resolve it.
Okay.
Because we do have to vote on Dale Street at this town meeting.
Right.
And then we need to figure out where we're going from here.
So my thought right now, and I do want to emphasize, I haven't locked into a position, but because of the timing, I am trying to get some answers. My thought right now on Dale Street is that be processed, assuming that we'll need an override, assuming that it's not appropriate for a debt override.
No, it is
then-
appropriate for debt override.
The article actually is in the alternative.
Yeah.
Can be done as
If
a
we don't,
debt.
if we don't do it this way, it'll be done as a debt override. Debt
Okay.
exclusion, excuse me.
Mike, what, I thought with the,
That the article is written So it can be either a debt exclusion override.
Okay.
Or it can be a capital,
Okay.
a dedicated
Stabilization fund.
stabilization
Okay.
fund.
For some reason, I thought when we talked about this before, because it's $1 million and it's the feasibility, it's not part of the construction, you could not,
They broadened the definition
Oh.
when the Municipal Modernization Act, when they rewrote 44, Section 7, they broadened the categories.
okay. If that's true and it can be a debt override, then the magnitude of the issue of that $1 million is smaller in my mind right now. Well, the issue I have is I'm trying to picture what the complete picture at the town meeting is gonna be around the total overrides that taxpayers are gonna be asked to consider and either vote or reject. And I fear that those total overrides are very large. So for this year, given that there's other overrides that could be there, my inclination is not to go find a way to put yet another override, especially $1 million override. That's just purely practical impact on taxpayers. So I just leave that out there. I think I'm still waiting to hear a clearer picture from the warrant committee on what this is actually looking like, so.
Can I make a suggestion, though?
Sure.
And I think this is, because this is never gonna be a good year to do it, I think we should put aside for now the question of what else is on the warrant for this year.
I don't know how you can do that. We're a month away from town meeting.
No, I understand that, but I think in order to properly evaluate all of this in light of the other commitments, we have to talk about this issue in the first instance, because this is not a new issue, right? This issue has been,
Well, it kind of is, it's not a new issue in that you have to pay for capital. This is absolutely a new issue in terms of how the town is trying to project, anticipate, and proactively fund capital maintenance. Absolutely, it's new. We have many things that we're doing that are bubbling up expenses that we've either never recognized them before, or we are establishing a higher standard of maintenance than we've had in the past.
okay.
So there is
I
a
mean, that-
newness to this.
Right, but I mean, that came out in October, right? So Jerry presented his report to us in October.
And it's not complete.
I understand that, but I have not yet heard from anyone sort of a dissenting opinion from it, in the sense that he's way off.
It's
right?
not complete, well, I mean, we
Right,
haven't,
but I
because we
mean,
haven't.
it's not complete in the sense that he has these 4 other buildings he hadn't looked at, right? But
Well,
I haven't
there's-
had someone come back and say, he says it's 42 million, it's really 6 million, right? Or it's really 2 million.
I don't think anybody's spent time doing that yet, because, first off, I think he's done a tremendous job. But
Okay.
we already know there's buildings that are not in there. We know there's a building like the Dale Street School that is in there that doesn't belong in there. We know there's costs for things like handicap parking signs that probably don't belong in there. They're good for him to have that, and they'll be good for the departments to have that. But in terms of even defining what we're talking about as the target for a capital stabilization fund, we haven't figured out what's actually in and out of that bucket to be able to make an intelligent assessment of how much money we have to put into it. The only reason that the discussion's been $1 million this year is because there's a need for a feasibility plan for a Dale Street school.
Well, and because Jerry thinks that, based on his review of the plan, that's an adequate number over 20 years. I mean, his assessment, I understand it, his view is that, given the things you've raised, the fact that, for example, and we talked about this last night at the warrant committee, the fact that a lot of the Dale Street school expenses will not be part of this, right? So
Right.
if you took this at face value, and you were saying that he's 100% correct, then $1 million is not enough, right? Because he's projecting 42 million.
Right.
And so the reaction would be, if you're taking his plan as 100% accurate over 20 years, you'd say we're underfunding it by half, right? You'd be saying, well, it's not nearly enough. I think what he's done, and I think the feedback we've gotten from him, is that because of these things, and again, you're not going to be 100% accurate projecting anything out over 20 years, right? I mean, you're not going to say, look, actually in 2037, we're actually going to pay $68,000 for the wiring at.
Well, what you do on that is you program it, though. You don't know for sure that 18 years from now you're going to spend that money, but you basically build a program model that says, look, this is a building, here's how often the roof gets replaced, here's how often we do this. We program it out, and then as you actually do the work, or you see the needs, you're going to make adjustments as you learn things. But my point is,
I think
not
yeah,
about the direction we're trying to take this. I am absolutely on board with the direction we're trying to take it. My point is, we're trying to jam it in this town meeting, and I'm saying we're not prepared to do that. We haven't thought through the procedures on how things get put into this. There's some stuff you got in here, I kind of like the idea. We have issues. When Ian came in on the information, on the IT budget, we realized that we have a town that can create information systems and put them in place and then come back to Jerry and say, fix them, keep them up. And then Jerry suddenly is faced with a staffing issue because we aren't getting out in front of the things, and IT is one that's really hard to get out in front of. But what I saw in your draft that I liked was we have this capital stabilization fund, which is going to take on the long-term capital maintenance needs of those things that make it onto the capital list that are accepted on that list that we recognize as the obligation of that fund. I see that as one of the controls we can start to put in place so that, for instance, when the high school puts in a high school turf field, we suddenly have a discipline that says, well, it's okay if you're going to pay for it all the time, but if you want the town to pick up that maintenance, you better make sure that before you put the turf field in, you've projected out what those costs are. And we've had the discussion about whether the town is going to pick that up as a long-term capital maintenance item in the stabilization fund.
Right.
So I like where this is going. I'm just saying, we don't have those procedures in place. He has not, when he came in to present that, I asked the specific question, when will you have this done, Jerry? And at that meeting, what we said was, all right, we're going to kind of continue to handle the capital budgeting the way we always have this year, because Jerry thought it was going to take him another year. So in my head, until I saw this, I was saying, I think that's where we're going for this year, because we're not ready.
Well, right, for this year, and that's why, I mean, I think, and so I think to your point, Gus, I mean, that's what I'm trying, and again, there's no pride of authorship here. That's what I'm trying to get at, which is the idea is, it can't be too complicated.
Right.
Right, it can't be too complicated, and it can't just be aspirational. Right, it can't just be, here's our financial policies, and it's, we want to be fiscally conservative, we want to, you know, I mean, those are goals, which are good. And so what I'm, and you're not going to, one thing I think we're learning, I mean, certainly with respect, I think with the housing production plan, if you want to make any plan work, you've got to have institutionalized responsibility for who's in charge of it, right? And so the basic concept that I had, and apart from specifics, is that the people who have to be in charge of this plan ultimately are the selectmen and the school committee. Because between the selectmen and the school committee, those are the two elected boards that are responsible for the buildings in town. And so that ultimately, in order, and in a town like ours, where 70% of the budget is schools, it doesn't make any sense for the selectmen to have financial policies and procedures that the school committee is free to accept or reject. And so the idea is 80% of our capital building plan is school-related. It's almost always going to be 80% school-related, right? There are biggest buildings, there are most used buildings that have most people in them. And so the idea is ultimate authority and accountability for all of this has to be with the selectmen and the school committee. That the school committee has to agree that it's a capital building plan that reflects their priorities. And that then the selectmen, obviously, we ultimately control whether an override goes on the ballot. We ultimately will control under the the MMA, control the inputs into the stabilization fund, right? So that was sort of the working assumption. And then it was to decide which institutions then are going to have responsibility for the specifics. And so we kind of, there's sort of two subcategories, right? You've got the 5-year capital budget, and then you've got the capital building maintenance plan. And it seemed to me that the entity that had the most expertise to sort of oversee the capital building and maintenance plan is the permanent planning and building committee. And so you can't just have a town employee doing it because there's tax dollars involved. And so the permanent planning and building committee then takes charge of the 20-year capital maintenance plan and can help advise on, when you get to the point, to make the kind of judgment on, all right, how much is it going to cost to maintain this building? Do we now have to start looking at a new building, right? What is the point at which it no longer makes sense to throw money? So that would be the committee sort of institutionally that would be responsible for kind of coming to a recommendation which goes to the selectmen and the school committee. And then, you know, periodically, the selectmen and the school committee will vote, okay, this is our 20-year plan.
So,
And then the other piece of it then is just on the overall capital budget, which is, as you say, you program it, right? You get further along. You can really only do that in 5-year chunks.
well,
The town charter already
no, actually,
requires-
this is where so what you just described about the 20-year capital building plan may address one of the issues I raised early that's not in the front here, but later on. You program the maintenance for a building as well, but you don't program it 5 years out. You program it for 20 or 30 years out.
And that's the 20-year.
So if what you're describing here, so I didn't understand this, I think, from the draft. So for buildings, what you're saying is that's the 20-year capital building plan, that's its own capital stream, and it's a separately managed stream for buildings. And if we want to put it under the planning and building committee, if that's relative to the school committee, that works fine. As long as we have this thing that's looking at buildings and is looking 20 or 30-year timeframes, that's good. Then I need to understand what,
It's defined here as building-related investments and repairs, any other capital expenses in excess of $500,000. Updated every 2 years.
that last part, again, any
Well-
other capital expense?
Building-related capital expenses.
Building-related,
Just in case
yeah,
somebody's
building-related
gonna say
capital expense,
something
okay.
doesn't fall into
Okay,
that.
got
other
it,
ca-
got
sort
it,
of it's a
okay.
catch-all. If it's big
Okay.
enough to get to that level.
So what's the capital budget itself? What does that deal
So
with?
the capital budget deals with what ends up on the warrant every year as the capital budget.
And how is that managed?
So that would be managed, again, by the capital budget committee. Instead of
So they'll be responsible for vehicles?
vehicles, let's
uh,
see, vehicles, here, how did I define it?
Building
Find it.
repairs, road improvements, vehicles.
Well, are
information
we doing road
technology,
improvements?
Yes,
Water sewer
yeah,
projects.
I mean, they do right now.
So, the
Projects more than 25 grand, 5 years.
Because the way it
well,
is,
you had,
the way it
I
is
think
right
you
now,
had water
Gus,
and
is that-
sewer. What I'm getting at is that water and sewer, I think, kind of knows how to manage its own capital.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the things you called out, but I'm saying, do we need to pull that in, or can they do that? When you talk about roads, I'm not sure that road improvement, the cost of road improvement probably starts to eclipse the cost of buildings.
Well, but here's what we do now. Let me just describe what we do
Yep.
now. What we do now is we have a capital budget.
Yep.
Right? It includes water and sewer, includes everything. Right? Everything that's defined as capital is on the
Yeah,
capital
yep.
budget. And it comes before the capital budget committee, and the capital budget committee has a fixed amount that's given at the outset of the budgeting process to spend from the levy. And then they also vote on whether to authorize capital expenditures for water and sewer funded out of the enterprise funds, capital expenditures for other departments that are funded out of revolving funds. So we already have, and under the town charter, we have to have a capital budget, which ends up looking mostly like a set of requests from departments. And so what I'm proposing to do is, now that we're going to have a fleet maintenance program, all of our vehicles are coming under control of the DPW. We have the road management software.
Pavement
Road
management
pavement
plan.
management
They
software.
manage it, yeah.
We're now able, I think one of the problems the capital budget committee has had, and one of my kind of occasional capital budget committee hobby horses, is that, we never really had a clear picture over the long term of all the various capital expenses. And so, for example, Chapter 90 funds, we get Chapter 90 funds. Historically, Chapter 90 funds have been used for a mixture of roads and vehicles, okay? I think we should have a kind of coordinated policy of what we're gonna spend Chapter 90 funds on. And so what this policy is trying to get at is that the capital budget committee, instead of just kind of meeting a few times, basically what we do is we meet a few times kind of in February and March. We go through the requests, we figure out how much money we have, and we kind of come up with filling that bucket. Instead, now, we'll look at it and say, okay, we've got a lot of capital requests. We've got roads, we've got vehicles, we've got whatever else goes in that bucket. And to project, okay, here's what we need. And also, I think water and sewer, even though it's funded out of the enterprise funds, you have to have that in mind too, because we also pay for that, right? And the idea is to take these expenses and try to even them out, to make sure, number one, that we're not underfunding it, right? Because the current system that we have encourages, to a certain extent, underfunding our capital.
Sure does.
Because it sort of starts up front and says, here's how much we have, fight over that, right? And in some years, you if there's a little extra, all of a sudden you see departments trying to throw additional stuff in there, right? And hey, we got an extra $25,000 this year, we'll get X or Y, right? Which may be not really a priority at all, but hey, there's $25,000 there this year. And so the idea is, because we're gonna have these two pieces, right? We're gonna be taking, hopefully, most of the building stuff out of that funding source, right? But you still have to know what it is, right? Because ideally, if you can plan it, it'll never be perfect. There's a smooth payment process. In other words, you don't have big leaks. You're not going to suddenly have, we have $5 million we got to do this year because we haven't spent on the buildings. And so you can kind of even out the tax expenditure. But you also have the capital budget committee kind of taking on that oversight role, kind of on behalf of the selectmen and the school committee, saying, here's all of our capital projects, and then trying to plan it out financially. You know, I mean, we know in this particular year, we're gonna have a big water and sewer project, or we're gonna have something else, and so here's what we have, and we're gonna try to manage those over the next 5 years, right?
So so I guess the
And then the
question,
school committee and the selectmen will say, yes, we agree that this is what we're gonna do for the capital budget for 5 years. And then instead of having the process happen, and the risk, I think, that you raise, Gus, with respect to the overrides, because what would happen is, you get into the budget process, right, and you're in the mix of the budgets, and well, originally it was 500,000 for the capital budget. Let's see if we can get it down to 4, because we can find it, find that extra 100 grand and get ourselves under there. Instead, my view is, with capital, because it's more predictable, you should come into the budgeting process knowing what you've agreed you have to spend for that year. So maybe it's a year where just the way things fall, there's a little more on the tax levy than expected. Or maybe you can manage it so that you can even it out, but that's gonna require you to use your Chapter 90 funds in a way that might be different. May require you to use free cash or revolving funds in a way that are different. So you can try to plan that out, and you're kind of coming into the process knowing what the sort of capital treatment is up front, rather than have it just, because it shouldn't be something that's really just subject to the push and pull, in the same way that like a half a secretarial position might be.
so my first point will just be that the explanation you just gave described a very complex, multi-layer, interactive process, and my starting point was, I don't think we've sorted this all out to be able to pull the trigger on something in April. And I think your explanation demonstrated it. But to react to some of the things that you've said, the idea that the Capital Budget Committee is going to concern itself with smoothing out all of the expenses, and I'm going to go to water and sewer with what I've understood that water and sewer has done, and water and sewer has had to figure out how to smooth out, like they already do it. So the idea that somehow or another we need a capital budget committee to do it on top of water and sewer doesn't make a lot of sense to
I don't think they'll be
me.
second-guessing water and sewer.
Okay.
But it would seem strange to say we're gonna not even be aware of what water and sewer is doing. Because as of right now, the way it works right now, water and sewer budget requests come to the capital budget committee, and the capital budget committee votes on the water and sewer request.
My perspective on that is that's nearly a rubber stamp, because
And it
it's
may
like,
still-
you
it
guys
may
know
s-
what you're doing. You've got your own enterprise fund to pay for it. The people who are paying that enterprise fund's the one who are the ratepayers, who often are taxpayers, but it's not the same as the impact on taxes.
Right,
So
and it
my
may
point
still
is,
be a rubber stamp.
don't fix it if it ain't broke.
Right, it may still be a rubber stamp.
The next question on
Just you're gonna
chapter
have a-
90.
You're gonna be stamping
yeah.
a longer period of time.
So then I go to chapter 90 funds, and I'm trying to picture, I think of chapter 90 funds as being, and I'm not staking out a position here, I'm just trying to understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve. Chapter 90 funds I think of as the highway department having those funds to be able to undertake projects and either spend money for those projects that they think are needed to be done, or spend it on equipment if that's what they need for equipment. And in essence, I've looked at the chapter 90 funds as a resource that's available to the highway department that can either lessen or increase the highway department's need to come to a capital budgeting committee for town-provided funds for equipment or something like that. And so,
That's traditionally how it has worked.
I know.
And again, this is a reflection of my own view.
Yeah.
That, I mean, that it's not a resource for the highway department, it's a resource for the town. And the town and the selectmen, or the committee designated by the selectmen, ought to decide how it's spent. So
But-
I don't,
but
my
you
my
don't
own
have-
personal
but you
view
don't
is
have-
we shouldn't spend chapter 90 funds on vehicles, right?
But
We
you
should
don't-
spend vehicles on the capital and spend the chapter 90 funds on roads. But again, this is sort of the idea with respect to the capital budget committee matching the expenses with the source of funds. And saying.
but
you know,
I guess, so to that point, I'm not sure that I see the superior insight of a capital budgeting committee overriding the judgment of a highway department head on the best way to use capital, as long as it's all legal. If the head of the highway department says, I need these chapter 90 funds for this piece of equipment versus I need these chapter 90 funds for a road, what is the added knowledge or wisdom or whatever that a capital budget committee member brings?
I mean, you could
that
say the
knows
same thing
better
about
than
us, right? And so, I mean, we're still the elected representatives of the town and ultimately responsible for this. And so,
Yep.
my view is how chapter 90 funds are used is ultimately a decision for us. Whether it's in a specific circumstance or if it's in a procedure, I mean, we've had disagreements in the past with how funds have been spent, and even though there are certain funds that are committed to the control in the first instance of certain departments, ultimately, all of those funds come to the town. And
Well,
so
yeah.
there should be, and it shouldn't be the case, that, and you may, while they might not have superior expertise, I mean, I've seen you do it, Gus, plenty of times in the warrant committee, where you questioned somebody who had superior expertise to you, but you asked really good questions about why they were doing something,
Yeah, yeah.
and it came back around to it. And it's simply taking that process and putting it through the capital budget committee, which includes people who, it's not just, people like me who don't know anything, there's actually people on there who do know stuff. And by asking those questions and ultimately making a policy decision. In other words, the highway department may really want a truck, but we may say, look, and the condition of the roads are such that we think we ought to focus those resources on the roads in the same way we would with any other department. I mean, you take the input, and this is not to say that the capital budget committee is gonna tell Mo, no, forget about it. But, there are competing demands for resources, and I don't think each individual department ought to be the one deciding necessarily, ultimately, how are we gonna spend these funds when there might be broader policy questions. And that's, the idea then is, again, to take what the capital budget committee already does with respect to all of these things.
I
and
mean,
then-
what I'm trying to get my hands around, I guess, is that I'm not disagreeing with the capital budget committee's oversight. So if the highway department comes in with a plan for chapter 90 funds, the highway department ought to be able to explain, as water and sewer for that matter, ought to be able to explain why whatever the request is makes sense or is important. And if that is a really silly, if even as a layperson, you can't understand the explanation, yeah, that's when you dig deeper. I'm trying to understand how this is, so if that's all this is, I'm sitting there saying, well, that's kind of what we already do. And I'm trying to understand how this is changing it. Now, maybe it's not.
It's not changing a lot. What it's doing is it just as with the capital stabilization fund, is designed to create a revenue stream to pay for these repairs, right? An institutionalized revenue stream to pay for expenses we know we have. The same thing with the capital budget process is just taking all of the capital things we're already doing and trying to organize it into one place and then project it over time. And so to have the capital budget committee taking a harder look at how we're paying for all the capital items. And so what those sources of funds are, and not putting things on the budget that we can't ultimately pay for. And so to make sure we're prioritizing it in advance. In other words, if you can see something coming down the road that we think is really important, and maybe it's 2 years down the road, but we need to kind of pay for it now because we have either the resources to do it or some availability of money, we should prioritize that instead of, because it certainly seemed to me under a lot of circumstances that some capital items got paid for and not, just sort of depending on the year they came up, right? If you came up in a good year, you might get something through that really isn't a priority, where then looking back, you might look back and say, well, gee, just as we are with all these repairs that Jerry have made, well, gee, maybe instead of paying for some of this other stuff, we should have put this money aside.
So I've looked at that, I mean, it certainly can be improved. I've looked at that as the fiscal filter that this town has had to keep the growth of capital expenditures from going out of control. So in other words, merely because you project an expense doesn't mean, well, now we have to figure out how to pay for it. Merely because, and I'll tell you where I'm looking at this. I'm sitting there thinking about the facilities, and I'm thinking about the building, and I'm thinking about our old highway department garage and our miserable police station, and saying, so what would we have done if this had all been in place 20 years ago? I don't think we would have wound up building the two buildings we did when we built them, because I think we would have had some plan that would have forced us to build them a whole lot sooner. Now, my observation on that is we would have wound up spending more money on capital than we did. I think some people, you could make an argument that we should have, but I'm worried because I'm looking at all these proactive systems, which I think is a good thing for us to do, all uncovering and generating new financial obligations, which represent significant jumps from how we've dealt with the financial obligations in the past. I'm not fighting the fact that we need to improve on those financial obligations, but I'm uneasy about how we're suddenly going to do this step change up to this new method of managing and being proactive, unless we have a plan for how we're going to sit there and unwind or deprogram a whole bunch of stuff in the town to where that doesn't just show up as gee, we've got all these new expenses, we need overrides, and it's all gonna come down to the taxpayer. Because the taxpayer is the one last person, this slide that Mike's talking about mandates coming down, therefore we have to do things that we have to pay for. The one person at the bottom of the pile is the taxpayer. And this is shaping up for me to be a very brutal impact on the taxpayer, this particular town meeting. I could be wrong.
I think you're right. But for me, it's an issue of planning. More planning is better in my mind. And we're gonna have, we know that if we spend money on maintenance of our roads, that we can extend the lifetime of our roads, and so that it behooves us to be spending that money. We know that if we upkeep our buildings and spend on the proper maintenance of our buildings, we can extend the lifetime of our buildings.
Unless that, so first off, to your first point, planning, absolutely. I'm on board with the planning. I'm reacting more to some of the controls that are being proposed here than the idea that we want to plan. I'm saying, yes, I do think we want to get out in front on the facilities. I would just like Jerry to finish his plan and give us the real numbers that we're dealing with, which is what I thought we said we were going to do when he came and presented the plan. The issue, Pete,
I mean,
is.
He's pretty far along. I think he left off the 4 buildings that really don't have much of.
No, there's a number, in my opinion, on that facilities plan, there has to be a screen about what things actually bubble up and are truly capital stabilization fund type things versus a number of other things that are very useful for anybody who has control of that building. The crack in the parking lot at the seam between this and Janes Avenue is one of the things that's in that book. Well, fixing the crack in the asphalt, I think, is a really good thing to do for somebody, but not funded out of a capital stabilization fund.
This is, right, exactly. And this is where the approval process comes in. So the check on this is us, right? The check is ultimately the school committee and the selectmen are gonna have, we haven't approved this plan yet. This is a draft plan from a town employee. That, what I propose here, and I think the way it ought to work, is that after it's been vetted by the people who know what they're doing, okay, the Permanent Planning and Building Committee, and Jerry, it would then come to the school committee and come to the select. And we would sit down and go through it, just as what you're talking about.
Yep.
And so.
I'm on board with
The
that.
crack in the sidewalk wouldn't go in there. If we say, look, the crack in the sidewalk, it's out, right? This is, however it works out.
Yeah.
Because the plan ultimately has to be approved by people who are accountable to the voters and the taxpayers. And so we are saying, you can go to the website in the town, and some night when you can't sleep, you can look and say, here's what the school committee and the selectmen have approved, right? And so we haven't approved any of this. And so I agree with you on that. And so that was what I tried to build in, is that ultimately, it's not just, because if it's not a plan, this is the problem. Planning is great, and I agree. Planning without any sort of institutionalized ability to execute on the plan, and planning without ability to pay for your plans, is just air, right? It looks good, it's a super PowerPoint, you can put it in a file, you can probably win an award for your plan, but you're not going anywhere. And so the only way we actually have a plan is if there's a funding plan to go with it, and there's a lot of ways to do it, and if there is somebody accountable for doing it and approving it. And that's why the selectmen and the school committee have to approve it, because we're the only ones who can make anything happen.
So my
This
main
is what
point-
happened with the housing production plan, right? The town employees drafted it, supported it, didn't get support, and it went nowhere until the town boards.
So my main point to what you just said is, but you start with the plan that tells you what the requirement is, and then you figure out how you finance that requirement. You don't start with the financing action and then saying, we'll fill in with a plan later.
Right, well, I mean, I agree with you. I agree with you with that. And so, which is why I've been saying since this came out in October, we have to develop a funding plan for it. And so, I agree with you that it would be better if we had done this several months earlier. It would be better if we'd done this.
Well, Jerry said he wouldn't have it for another year, so.
No, he didn't say that he wouldn't have it for another year.
I
He said
asked
he
him
wouldn't be ready to
specifically.
start executing that.
No, I asked him when he came and presented, and we pointed out that, well, you have the Dale Street School in here, it doesn't need to be in here. You haven't done the new buildings. I said, well, Jerry, should we expect this to be done in time for this town meeting? And he said, no. And I said, well, then I guess what we do for this town meeting is we continue on with the capital budgeting process we've had in the past, with the understanding that next year is the year we want to put this thing in place. And he said, yes. So I'm reacting to I'm not
Which is kind of
fighting.
what we're doing, though. This year's town meeting, we are under the current plan.
No.
And this one would be in place for next year's town meeting. And he wouldn't be spending out of this capital stabilization fund for 2 town meetings hence.
The money this year is just going to the school building, the Dale Street project.
I'm
That's
saying,
not-
and I'm saying, and that is a separate issue. How do we get $1 million to the Dale Street School? What I'm getting, and I started out by saying, we have about 4 or 5 issues that are all wrapped around into a solution, which I think is both premature and is badly timed. And that's where I'm coming from. I am not yet firmly locked in. That's why I took the time to do this, so you can see the details of what I said. But that's where I'm coming from. I'm not fighting the objective we have. I'm saying that if you do it, you need to know what you're actually working against. To your point, Pete, about having plans and being able to project costs, if you project those costs and those costs are too high, you don't just say they're high, I guess we have to tell the taxpayers to approve an override. You have to look and consider the possibility that we have overreached, we have either overprogrammed, we need to cut back to do or have the things in this town that we can actually afford to live with. So
And if
that
that's
whole
the case, though,
decision.
here's the thing, if that's the case, right, if you're right, okay?
Mm-hmm.
If you're right and Jerry's off by 2.5 times, right? The actual capital expenditures we have, they're not 42 million, they're not 35, they're not 27, they're like 12,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And we get into this process, then we come to a meeting, we vote, and we cancel out $1 million. Or if it turns out we need
We
less,
spend what we need.
we
Well,
turn
the way-
down to 300,000.
So this is a minor point, but the way you have this set up, there are 4 committees that have veto power over our ability to do this, because it says the only way we could do that is if 4 committees approve it.
Under the procedures we've adopted, which can be changed.
Okay,
But
so
the-
that, anyway, that's one of my comments down the
The
weeds.
reason for that is, and that can be changed as well, right? And again, this is a draft for discussion, right? But let's talk more about the conceptual issues and the details can be worked
Yeah.
out.
Yep.
The reason for that, right, is that, given that 80% of this is the school committee, right? The way the state has set up the system requires a level of coordination between the selectmen and the school committee, right? This works a little bit better in towns that have mayors, because the mayors are sort of in charge of the school committee, they have more control than the selectmen do. So we have to work together. And so, from the perspective of the school committee, I think they would want to have some certainty that the selectmen aren't just going to underfund school capital expenses and just decide, you know what, we're going to dial this back to nothing, and good luck with your school buildings, right? And so there does have to be, I think, whether it's a veto power or some other provision, some protection so that this coordinated effort doesn't fall apart if the selectmen suddenly decide not to participate anymore or otherwise. But that's sort of why
So
part
how
of
does
this
this change the authority of the selectmen, that the selectmen have right now?
doesn't change it at all. This is a policy we've adopted. If future selectmen, people don't like the policy, they can vote us out of office, put somebody else in, get a new policy. And so it's like any other policy that's not in the town charter. It's a policy adopted by the school committee, can change their mind 2 years hence. I mean, ultimately,
Okay, well, so
nothing
the
is
short
permanent.
answer, on a lot of this, if you need to look at my detailed comments rather than me just pulling them out thread by thread. I do have some concerns about the impact. It's actually concerns about the Board of Selectmen abdicating their responsibility and authority by throwing it onto committees. And that is by no way suggests that I'm saying, well, selectmen can do whatever they want, they don't have to listen. It's just that the way I read this, it seemed to me, I wasn't even sure some parts of it were legal, to be honest with you. So.
yeah,
they
I
may or
mean,
may
and if
not.
they're not, we shouldn't do it. But I mean,
Yeah.
this is actually designed to force the selectmen
will
to
keep us straight on
take
that,
more
yeah.
responsibility.
So,
Have more to do, rather than abdicating it to town departments or other people to do things. This puts the authority where it should be, with people who are democratically accountable to the town. But to your
So-
point, if we overshoot the mark on the $1 million, we just reduce it.
so let me suggest this, that I've got a lot of comments in here. It might be more useful to give you guys a chance to read it. I can tell you that I am not against the objective that you're trying to accomplish. I do have concerns that this thing has been crafted together pretty quickly, and I think it's premature. And again, because I'm looking ahead to a town meeting that I don't like I'm not, actually, Scott's the one who's probably not looking forward to the scenario there, but I am concerned about the total potential burden that taxpayers will be asked to vote on, and I'm concerned on a couple things. Certainly, I'm concerned on what that cumulative burden would be if they approved it all, but I'm also concerned of what might not be accepted even if they don't approve it all. because they just look at this whole thing and say, well, no on this, no on this, no on this. So all of the things being equal going into the town meeting, I would prefer things that were less burdensome and less of a leap for the taxpayers. And I'm saying that on an assumption that the taxpayers, if everything that's on the table is going to be approved, the taxpayers are actually going to have to go along with something here. So the fewer the things that are there, the less salt in the wound, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. And I would make one point on that, which is from an overall economic standpoint for the people in the town, we're not going to have a better year. Okay. I mean, the economy is as strong as it's been in the last 10 years. It's unlikely that we will have an economy as strong as this. I mean, it may stay the same for a while, but it's unlikely that it's going to get any stronger. And so all the pressures that we have this year, we're going to have in any other year, right? All the pressures that we're going to have, I mean, all of these things that you raise and all of the issues that we have are really structural financial problems and structural financial issues. They're not, these things happen to be coming up in a particular year, but they're not particular to this year. They are financial issues and pressures that we have and are going to have based on the policy decisions and judgments that the town meeting and the voters have made. And so, I don't, there's only, we're not here, I don't think, to try to protect the town meeting from itself, right? And people are going to make a judgment one way or the other about what they want, about the size of the budgets, about what, and to me, I think what we do have to do, have an obligation to do, is to give the legislative branch an opportunity to vote on reasonable and prudent policies, right? And so I agree that it would be great if we could spread every override out and only have one every year and make it easier. I'm not sure any of the things that are coming up this year will go away if we don't do it. I don't think this will go away. I don't think the need for funding our capital will go away. Now, we may wait another year and come back to it a year
but
from
the
now.
funding for this year, I mean, my whole point is it's premature because we don't have the plan. We don't actually know what we're working against. The funding that's proposed to go in this has nothing to do with what's there. It has to do with meeting a feasibility plan for the school. So the fact is, we're using the need for that funding to not only meet the funding, but also suddenly put the structure in place. I'm saying the structure's premature, and what's actually happening is the structure's doing absolutely nothing for anything outside of this one feasibility plan for the Dale Street School. I'm saying fund that, unlink that from this structure and take more time to get this structure right. So I'm okay to just let this sit here for right now. I've put the comments in here.
Do you have any other sort of conceptual issues we should discuss, though, other than the specific?
I have some philosophical issues in the same way that you have, where you're talking about free cash. Totally disagree with free cash.
I know.
You're talking about the 10% standard. You'll see in the wording. I'm not sure that we're in disagreement. The 10% standard, when you sit there and say we will maintain a 10% standard on our reserve fund, well, that means that's 10% you can't use. It's like we need a target that says we want our reserve fund to be here and here, but if we're going to use it, so there's maybe some semantic issues there.
It's a semantic
The free
issue.
cash I do have an issue with, and that's because in my observation over the 20, when I first ran across using the last article to use free cash to lower, the very first year on the warrant committee that I saw using free cash to lower the tax rate, I said that's eating your seed corn. And then I realized, actually, it's not. What it is it allows the budgets for town departments to be sufficiently soft that they can ask for what they need, and if they need it, they spend it, but if they don't spend it, they give the money back. And so the real issue around free cash for me, and Mike, you've got more years than I do, so you can tell me I'm all wet, but the real issue for free cash for me is we carry a free cash balance. We allocate a certain amount of free cash at the end of, at the end of a town meeting. When that amount or greater comes back to free cash at the end of the year, to me, this is a unique organization. I don't know any other organization that can manage its budgets in a way that trusts its departments to spend money responsibly and give it back if you don't need it, except for Medfield.
So I don't disagree with that, right? So in other words, if we had our overall free reserves at an acceptable level, I'd agree with you, right? And so my issue is the use of free cash when you don't have acceptable reserve levels. That's my concern, is that because your free cash operates as a reserve, right? So you have a year, and my concern is that works fine sort of until it doesn't, right? In other words, until you end up having to spend it all in a given year, or until you get to the point, and this is my real concern, is that if you look at the record of the town, 06, 07, 08, 09, we did an override every year, right? We did $2.5 million of overrides over a four-year period, the last several of which were during the last recession. And so what I would like to avoid is getting to a situation where we have the next recession, which, again, who knows when it's going to be, okay? But it probably will be, right? I don't think we have now reached the level of sufficient economic genius that we know we're going to have a recession-free economy. So it would be nice and preferable, in my view, that when you get to the next recession and the excise taxes go down and local aid will be on the chopping block and that suddenly we have a big deficit, instead of saying, okay, now not only is there a recession, so people are losing their jobs, their house values are going down, we also have to either cut town services significantly, or we need to have an override in the middle of a recession. So my whole thing on this and the numbers and the details, we can figure out what the numbers are, is that to plan such that in the next recession, we can get through it without an override and get through it without substantial cuts in town services, because when things were good, when things were going well, we put the money aside. And to me, in my mind, things are now going well and as good as they're going to go.
So two things. If we can get there without an override now, then I would agree with you. Two, it's not free cash, it's not the account. It's the stabilization fund. If your issue is, I think we should have a higher reserve target for our total reserves, the main account for those reserves to tap in that time is not free cash. The main thing is to tap stabilization, and I would be happy to entertain a policy that says now is a good time for us to be getting ready for the next winter, economic winter, but it's the stabilization fund is where that
I agree.
started.
And so that's why I think I put in the policy that the transfers from free cash should be to other reserve accounts and not to operating expenses. And so you build up the reserve accounts to a certain level. And then once you're there, then you just use free cash wherever it wants. But what happens is the way departments look at free cash is they look at it as this is spending, this is money that we can spend that we don't have to go to the taxpayers for. And so I hear, and you probably do too, you hear from department heads, wow, that free cash level is pretty high when you start talking about budgets. And we have, when you started on the warrant committee, when I started on the warrant committee, that number at the end of town meeting was $500,000. Okay, that number at the end
And
of
the
town
free
meeting.
cash, the free cash balance was lower.
I agree, yeah.
The free cash balance has been going up, so look at the words, and if we're not arguing over stabilization fund versus free cash, I reacted to free cash only being able to go to long-term obligations, and it's like, that's not really.
Yeah, cash is fungible, but the idea is until you get your reserves, because otherwise free cash is a reserve, right? You get hit in a particular year, you can use that to
I just don't
bridge
know
the
that
gap.
we've ever quite used it that way, but Pete, I interrupted you.
Free cash has more purpose than, it's different from stabilization. It has other purposes. One of the purposes is to avoid short-term borrowing. Because if you have a good free cash balance, when, say, the teacher's summer payroll comes in and it's $3 million or whatever, if you don't have that money on hand because the taxes don't come in until August, then you can use the money that is surplus, in effect, in free cash to avoid having to go do a short-term borrowing. We haven't borrowed short-term in probably 35 years.
Yeah, it's working capital.
Yes. The other thing it's good for is emergencies. If you have an emergency, for example, the snow emergency, because we have a free cash balance, we can declare a snow emergency. If you have no free cash, you can't declare an emergency. Let's say you get a real bad blizzard like we had in '78, or you have a flood or something like that where you really need that money.
So
it helps you to get there. So it's a way to get through the tough times. It's a way to save money. Stabilization is putting money away for things you know you're going to need, but maybe you don't need them this year, but maybe you'll need them next year.
Or you're worried about a
Yes.
recession
Yes.
somewhere in the next 10 years and you want to.
One of the problems I see, and one of the reasons I support the stabilization fund, is because I see the problem the schools got into because of a state policy that said, we will give you bottom line control. You can spend it any way you want it, and you don't have to spend it maintaining your buildings. And if you don't maintain your buildings, come to us and we'll build you a new building. Well, that's the dumbest policy, one of the dumbest policies I've ever heard of. And as a result, the state ended up with an $8 billion backlog of school building projects. Now, what I'm afraid of is we have trouble sometimes distinguishing between short-term and long-term. And we have trouble distinguishing between wants and needs. And I think if you don't set aside money to take care of what you already have, and you go around creating new programs, creating new buildings, then it's doesn't make any sense. If you can't take care of what you already have, why are you adding to it? And I think you need to set aside a pot of money. Now, the way this works, the $1 million, if you appropriate for the feasibility study, the second year you don't have to appropriate $1 million. You can decide you only want to do 800,000 or 500,000. That's up to the Board of Selectmen what they want to appropriate the second year. The other thing is, you can appropriate the full million and say, okay, we know 3 years down the road we're going to have a major roof problem with our schools, and it makes sense to set the money aside and not incur interest costs, because we will have set that money aside, we'll have earned interest on it, and then we don't have to borrow, and we can pay for that with out of our stabilization fund. So it's a good thing, because I believe it forces us to look at the long term. It forces us to look at what the real desperate needs of the town are. I mean, if you look at some of the problems that Jerry has run into, one of the reasons Jerry hasn't been able to complete his plan maybe as you would hope is because he's been running around ever since he got here, fixing holes in roofs, repairing leaky boilers, flooded kitchens. We hired this man, we started this program to come up with a way to address what we know is a major problem in the condition of our buildings. Why do we have him if we're not going to give him the resources to deal with it, if we're going to have him running around patching holes?
So let me stop right there for a minute. I'm not against the purpose or the objective of this. Here's my issues. One, we're at a historically low interest rate environment right now. So the idea that we need to not borrow, simply to not borrow, I don't believe is a driver. It could be, it would have been in the early 80s when we were 13 and 15%.
And the rates are starting to go up again.
Point two, we put $1 million in now. You say, well, next year if the selectmen decide not to put that in, they can put 800,000. I have two questions on that. One, the way this is worded right now, that only happens if all the four committees you called out approve dropping that. So that the way you've got it drafted.
That can be changed.
That may change. Mark, I have a question for you. In this stabilization fund override, I think, but I'm not sure, if the selectmen were to drop the override, the amount to 800,000 in the second year, that then becomes the new ceiling. So you don't just get to kind of do what you want from year to year. There will be a tremendous pressure not to drop it, because if you do drop it, you can't put it back up there again. So this is, it's like me trying to come to grips with what this mechanism really is and what the implications are. It's not just you can do whatever you want to do. The selectmen would be able to continue to ratchet it down, and then I guess you have to pass it again if you wanted to ratchet it back up. So I'm leery of it until I'm sure I understand what the mechanics are and how that applies. I don't disagree with you about, needing to support Jerry in the long run, but here's my question. We're talking about putting $1 million override that comes out of the taxpayer's pocket. Have we really got an entire town that has not put any money whatsoever into maintaining any of this stuff? If we can find $1 million to pull back from the current department's operating budgets, if we can find $750,000 that represents the money that those departments are already putting in for maintenance, and we pull that back out to fund this, I got a much different view on this. But this is, let's pretend that nobody is putting any money whatsoever into maintaining any buildings until we put this $1 million, Jerry's adrift. Where's that money?
Where is the money? It's being spent to implement the 20-year capital plan.
No, he wants to know whether
Oh.
people are already spending this money to maintain these buildings.
The
And this
bu-
is
the
not
budget-
really, in other words, what
We
meetings
don't
are-
have buildings that fall apart in 5 years. We're talking about the Dale Street. When was the Dale Street School built? I don't care what the rest of the state's doing.
I
We
believe
have
100
buildings
years
that we,
ago,
one way or
yes.
the other, however miserably we do it with holes in the roof, we somehow or another manage to continue to use these buildings for a long, long time. And even to the point where the highway department workers gets their pizza all wet when it rains out because there's nothing in the roof.
I mean, to that point,
We've
though,
done
Gus,
that.
To that point, then, look, we control $11.8 million worth of budgets.
Mm-hmm.
Find what you want to cut from that and put that aside. You can go to the school budget, find what you want to cut from the school budget, and propose alternatively, we'll cut that amount from the school budget this year, we'll cut that amount from our budgets this year, and we'll put that into the capital stabilization fund, and that'll be an alternative.
If we
way to fund
can,
it.
if we could do that, then my position is a lot different, because all of a sudden now we've really done it.
Because obviously, because then we wouldn't be doing this. So, you know, what I'm saying is, if you can go find $1 million in the operating budgets that we can do instead of this, we can discuss that and come back to you can come back next week with $1 million you were going to cut from the
And what I'm saying,
budgets.
yeah, that's the thing we should be going and looking for. I don't know that we're gonna do that in the next month.
Yeah, I don't think that
I don't think that's gonna
is in the
happen.
operating budget.
I'm saying, right now, when we put all the new money into this override, what we're saying is, nobody's putting money into any buildings anywhere, even though these buildings have lasted for years, there's no money out there. We're giving everybody a
Well,
big
it's
windfall.
not true. We have been as part of the regular capital budgeting process.
So I'm saying if we.
So the question
so
is,
my
have we been putting enough into
And-
the buildings?
Well, if we pull that, I mean, I just don't think we can do this fast enough for the town meeting, which is why I have the position I have. But if we could even identify the inadequate amount that comes from those departments, and we said, this is where a piece of this is coming from, here's the incremental increase that we would like the taxpayers to see as an override, and the taxpayers saw that we were doing a downright honest effort to squeeze out the parts where that money already exists and pull it back to fund this thing, then I think that's a little different story for the taxpayers. Right now, it's just like, we don't have enough, let's just reset, and you just give us another $1 million. And
I
got
think,
heartburn
look, I
with
mean,
that.
we don't have that many budgets. So I think you can, in the next week, take the existing budgets that we have and come back and say, here's by how much we gotta cut the existing budgets.
Well, it's not for me to do it. I think actually,
Well,
the
yeah, but you're the
question
one
is,
saying
what's,
we- the money that
so,
you can do it.
I'm gonna
control that.
throw it to you, Mike, and then throw it where? I'd like to
I-
know where the maintenance where the maintenance component of every department that has a building, how much of their budget is going into the maintenance of the building, and zero is a really bad answer. Because I don't believe it's zero.
It's not zero, and you can dig that out, but I'm telling you, we get about 1.4 million in new revenues a year. That's between the property tax and the 2.5% increase, state aid increase, local receipts. We get about 1.4 million. The town budgets are up 1.9 million. We also have requests for a park and rec design building, for a council on aging addition design plans.
That's got nothing to do with building maintenance.
No, but I'm saying, are these things needs or are they wants? Is maintaining what you've got more critical than building more, than adding new programs?
Those are
And
great.
I think-
Those are some of the other override items that the taxpayers are gonna see, yeah.
Yes.
On the town side, last year, we spent a significant amount of time removing maintenance costs from individual department budgets to the facilities budgets. No town department should be spending any of their operating budgets on facilities.
So when we say we need $1 million for this stabilization fund, how does that relate to should that facilities budget then be rolled into that stabilization fund, and actually the override that we're throwing at taxpayers be less?
I think some of what's in that stabilization fund is not the maintenance items that are in the facilities budget, such as cleaning, that kind of thing. That's most of what was in the maintenance budgets,
But-
was minor
well, so-
repair and cleaning.
But here's the part that I'm wrestling with. So what we're saying, I hear you.
Yeah,
So that certainly is not the part we want. The capital budget's around cleaning. But what I'm saying is, these buildings have been up for years, the departments have been responsible for them, and we can't find where the money is that the departments have had to maintain those buildings in the sense that we're talking about maintaining, that we're creating this capital maintenance budget for. We can't find any money anywhere that represents how the departments were spending that. If we didn't have this.
If I didn't put in 12-hour days, I could sit down and figure this all out. But I'm here from 8 in the morning
think-
till
I
10
think
at
the
Apart
night.
from what's in the past,
You hear what I'm, no,
what's
it's,
in the budget for
it's
this year?
just-
I mean, you decide what is, if you think this is a higher priority, things that are in the operating budgets now, we can find $1 million in what's in the proposed operating budgets. I mean, the fact that they might have been, whatever they were spending on maintenance in the past is irrelevant, right? It's whatever's in the request for this year that should be cut back to carve out this money. And so, I mean, that to me, and I put this in my summary at the last meeting, right? We have three ways to do it. We can cut from operating budgets and fund it that way. We can fund it this way, or we can fund it by debt, right? And
I
those
guess-
are really the three sources of revenue we have.
I
If we
guess-
believe these are real expenses. If they're not real expenses, then we can congratulate ourselves and move on.
And I can cut $1 million, the budgets, I can cut 2 million, I can cut 5 million. The problem I'm gonna have is I can't get it through town meeting because the town meeting isn't gonna accept those cuts. So you have to deal with what the town will accept in terms of cuts and what they won't. And then you have to say, okay, these are their wants. Now, how do we address the needs? And maybe you have to address the needs through an override because there's nothing left to do those things because the people will not agree to cut the budgets. If you look at.
so I'd rather see the wants in as the overrides. And then if people want to sign up because they want something, that's great. Mike, I don't know if you're hearing my point. My point is that this is an override as it stands right now that's going to go to the taxpayers and say, we want you to approve $1 million. And it'll be $1 million every year. So it's not a prop 2.5% increase every year, but it's $1 million every year. And it's because we need to maintain our buildings. And all I'm saying is, we have buildings that we've been maintaining for decades. Those have been maintained through the departments that have responsibility for those buildings. I'm not asking for $1 million to come for that full amount, because I think we're trying to maintain to a higher standard. But what we're doing is we're saying, well, that money's been in the budgets for those departments to maintain those buildings. It's a little hard to find it. Why don't we just, just rub the sheet clean? We'll just pretend none of that's there. We'll let them just keep it. And we need you to cough up $1 million more so we can fund our capital. And I'm saying somewhere in there should have been money coming out of the departments, given that this is how we're trying to fund the capital maintenance. There should have been money that could have come to help contribute to that $1 million target that you have. If this is the year to ask for an override.
I think the reality is that money that might have been spent in the past is now being spent on health insurance, is now being spent on teacher salaries,
I
is
think-
being spent on firefighter salaries and police salaries.
That-
The
I
reality
would-
is
yeah,
that the
there's no
cost of
maintenance.
personnel
There isn't
has
budget.
gone up at a much higher rate than 2.5. So I think you probably, if you looked at the budget 15 years ago, when there was more state contributions and those expenses were lower, there probably was more. I think the reality is, just like at many levels of government, these other personnel-related costs have crowded out, and that's one of the reasons why, I've kind of come around to the view that you need this dedicated amount, because otherwise, those things will continue to crowd it out. Even if you carved out, if we squeezed everything this year and got a cut through town meeting to pay for it that way, the increase of those expenses, and unless people decide that they will take, fewer programs in the schools and fewer teachers in the schools and fewer police officers and fewer firefighters and fewer DPW folks. I mean, most of our expenses are personnel. 50% of our town budget is spent on the teacher's contract. And so, that's where the money is, right? And so, I don't see any appetite for people in the town to cut in those areas. We don't have a lot of fancy stuff here beyond the basics of town government. And so, I kind of come to the position of realism that I don't think there's going to be an appetite to find $1 million elsewhere.
So, I don't think we're gonna resolve this tonight. You should look at my comments about the specifics.
And Pete, you have some comments on this?
I have some things that I wrote down, and I'll scan that and send it to you guys
Great.
as well.
I think the only point I'll make is that most of the time in our meetings, we're talking about seniors who are, how do we hold taxes down? And then when we go in this direction, it's like we're chasing our tail. We're on one hand saying we want to hold taxes down. On the other hand, we can't control, we're not trying to control things. I'll have a much more informed position or viewpoint of this when the town meeting firms up, and I have some sense of how many of these overrides are. Like, the two building projects that you're talking about, I'm kind of hoping the permanent building committee will head them off at the pass, because they're neither one, I think you're right, they're wants.
Yeah, the
And
warrant committee voted last night to support the Park and Rec project.
Who did? The warrant committee?
Warrant committee,
Seriously?
yes.
Boy,
5-4 vote.
I was there, Gus, I saw it, I witnessed my own 2 eyes.
well,
And,
let the games begin.
when you took that capital budget and where did the money go? We used to have a capital budget of 550,000. It's now down to 400,000. And you know where that money went? In my opinion, it went for wants. And it came out of needs and it went for wants. And that's the problem that I think we need to address. We have to say we've got to fix what we have before we add to it. And we keep adding and adding and adding and not fixing and not maintaining.
And I'm not arguing with that point. My fundamental point to start with was just that we don't actually know what our target is.
And you never will, because you can have, planning is a dynamic process. You're not
I think we
always.
get a better handle on it than we have right now. But
Yeah.
let's not open that back up. We'll come back. You got my comment.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So the next item on our agenda is continue discussion Lot 3.
Believe me,
I think we might need a 2-minute break.
Well, I'm going to recuse myself
Yeah, you
from
can do
this
that.
discussion.
Believe it or not, as long as that last conversation was, this conversation, I think, is short.
Okay.
What?
Are we gonna disagree as just as much? Or
No, well, I don't know what you'll think of it, but it's short. And the reason I deferred on the lot number 3 contract is because I want to be sure that it's a relevant thing to even pass. After our last meeting, where you and I were dancing around each other around marginal cost and allocation of marginal cost, I was disappointed in that conversation. That's not a slam at you. I was disappointed.
I got way too worked up for this.
No. I was
Kept
just.
your cool like the gentleman you are, Gus? Is that what?
I'm not sure
Fortunately,
that I
that
did.
one was
I'm
not
not
on
sure that I
video.
did. I was disappointed in the conversation we had. But as I reflected on it over the next couple days, I basically said, you know what, if we continue down this path, Mike and I are gonna have a series of very silly conversations, and I'm not willing to have them. I've looked at Mark and I've looked at Christine, and the only reason I don't see anything in Mike's face is because he has such a poker face. But I think they have apprehensions about how silly this procurement that this RFP and I agree. I thought it was silly from the start. I think it's silly now. It's awkward, it's stupid. And I said, you know what? I'm not doing it. I'm withdrawing my agreement that we're gonna do this. I think we lock up lot number 3. We just put it off to the side. Cancel the RFP. Don't waste our time trying to do that. Whether it still makes sense to go ahead and approve this survey or appraisal, it may or may not, because what's gonna happen is a couple of years from now, we're probably gonna have to reappraise it.
They go stale
Yeah.
very quickly.
Here's what I want. I've spent way too much time over the last 2.5 years on lot number 3. I can absolutely guarantee you, way too much time. And I'm not the only one who's spent way too much time on it. But what I would like to see us do, we are, I think, gonna regenerate the town master plan. So the first thing that we need is a master plan where we actually have some coherence around what we wanna do with the property. We're gonna have a senior housing survey, which is gonna come out, that's gonna give us some sense, I think, of how big the senior housing need is. If we are gonna build senior housing apartments, as I look at it right now, assuming the Dale Street project goes through, those apartments should go on the Dale Street property right across the street from the public safety building, a quarter mile out of town, not at the end of a dead-end street, a half mile out of town. So my strategic view is it's a stupid place to put apartments for seniors. I am happy to let that play out, let the townwide master plan play out, let the beginnings of the development of the state hospital campus play out. And if at the end of all that, it becomes the most logical thing for us to do is to put senior housing or an apartment complex at the end of lot number 3, then that's fine. We'll visit that then. But after the conversation we had last time, it's like, I'm not, on behalf of both of us, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not willing to have those kinds of silly conversations. And I really have never liked the procurement at all. The property's been locked up for 23 years. It won't hurt it to be locked up for a couple more years. And when we get through this, we can then decide what to do with it.
Wow. I was gonna say I changed my mind. I was gonna do what you want. I guess we're done.
Everything I said.
I guess we're done then. I mean, look, I mean, my view of this is that we ought to get top dollar for that property, right? I mean, to me, I don't agree that if it sits there for another year, that's just the same, right? And I had thought that we had at least made, even though we had a disagreement substantively about the best use of it, between what the master planning committee had recommended versus what you wanted to do. And so, I sided with the master planning committee's recommendation on it. My number one priority is that we move that thing from being empty to having something on it. And so, I think that a commercial or industrial use will get less money for the town and have less value to the town than something else. However, since I'm not gonna be buying it myself, my preference would be to let the market figure out what is best, right? And let the market figure out what is best for any other particular uses, because I think there's reasonable arguments that that's not a great location for senior housing necessarily. There's also a lot of arguments that it's not a great location for a 4K type facility, right, for the same reasons, right? You're sort of landlocked. Those places succeed based on volume. They want it bigger rather than smaller. And because of the wetlands and everything else, it's not a huge site, right? If you were to say, what's the best place to build that type of facility, assuming that that would be a good thing for the town, it would be someplace where you had 10 acres, right? And you had giant, I don't know how big 4K is, but some of them are bigger than that, right? And it's more profitable, it's bigger. So I don't think it's an ideal location for either of the uses. But, my number one priority is, is getting that onto the tax rolls.
So I would suggest that rather than putting all the emphasis on that marginal piece that is not that attractive for anything, that we both should put perhaps our priority or our focus on the 12 acres south of Hospital Road, or we would put something far more valuable on the tax rolls. Or we should put our attention on the state hospital campus and getting things there where we can get far more. That's my point. This is presumably such a marginal, useless thing, and yet it has been a major lightning rod of differences and efforts. And it's like, it's the least significant of all the properties. Let's put that effort in on figuring out what to do with the 12 acres south of Hospital Road. Let's figure out what to do with a portion of the campus. And the issue in the way you've described it is that's looking at a single lot by itself in isolation. My point, I'm looking at this all strategically. I'm sitting there saying, where are the places, where are the most important things that we should put the things that this town needs? And that's not what I see us going down the road to do, because for whatever reason, there's been this continual tug of war on lot 3. So just leave that off. It's been that way for 23 years. If the market had such a compelling economic value, somebody would have been beating on our door to let them do it. Well, let's go to the property that really actually has the locked up value and unlock it.
I mean, how much more work is left to be done on it?
A lot.
You think so?
Yeah, after our last conversation, oh yeah.
Well, I mean, after our last
Yeah,
conversation,
it's a
I
flawed-
came around to agree with you on everything.
It's a flawed RFP, and the whole process is flawed. And I don't think it does either one of us credit to continue down that path.
Okay, let's take that aside. Let's say, what would you wanna do then? What would you be willing to do to keep going?
I
I
know, I've spent 2.5 years trying to do it, and after the last meeting, I said, stop. This is the least significant piece of property in this whole thing. I wanna see us push ahead on the Hinckley property as fast as we can. I would like to see something start to happen south of Hospital Road as soon as we can. And what's nice about that is there's no old buildings there or anything like that. And I'd like us to get serious about the state hospital campus. I don't accept that it's gonna take 5 or 6 years. I'm the only one who appears to be upset when the, what's the name, the company behind Peak House said, why don't you go to the campus? And they said, it's gonna take 5 to 10 years for Medfield to get its act together. Not a single voice said, what the heck, why? I understand it's complex, but we're not putting the pressure where it needs to be. We've drifted, we need to stop drifting, and we need to start getting some things going. And the state hospital campus is the most important thing for us to do.
No disagreement there. So, all right, well, let me think about this.
Okay.
You know, my view is that it's unimportant, so we gotta get it going and generate tax revenue one way or the other. I don't think it's a strategic roadblock to anything else. And so, let me think about it, and I'll think about it in context of the housing production plan. If I were to come back next week and just say, I'll agree with whatever you want, would you agree to at least go forward with RFP or whatever you want?
We put out another preliminary expression intent fairly easily.
If we took out the hospital committee's proposal entirely and just put it out there, just a straight RFP, highest bidder, would you do that?
Highest bidder for what?
I don't care, whatever it is you wanted to do, the sports complex,
You know,
maybe
Mike-
agitating for it, whatever that is.
If you have an idea, give me the idea.
No, your idea, I'm just saying, I mean, if I were to
no.
concede and then,
As I said, I have wasted way too much time on this issue for the last 2.5 years, and I just decided I'm not gonna waste any more time. If you have a concrete proposal, I'll be happy to look at it. I'm not doing that to string you along. Right now, I've taken it off the plate.
okay.
And
Cross
it's such
it
an
off.
insignificant piece of property that we can come back to it when we have a better sense.
Alrighty.
So no more lot 3, you can sit down for entire meetings now, Pete.
Oh, my God.
So that then raises the question,
No, we don't need the appraisal.
we don't need the
No.
appraisal.
Nope,
I think the appraisal was flawed in any event, so that's good.
alright, solving all sorts of problems.
Continued assignment of 2018 annual town meeting warrant articles.
Actually, since our last meeting, there was a string of meetings that were canceled. So we don't have, the ALS study committee was canceled, so I don't think you have anything to update on the.
Actually, I do have one question. Mike, did the warrant committee vote against the placeholder article for, I talked to Tom Marie yesterday, and he was looking at voting against the ALS, so their position would be against the ALS.
Against the ALS.
Just so you know how
Whatever you come up with there.
No,
against it.
so Tom.
I talked to him this morning, yeah.
What happened is, Tom Marie and I talked yesterday, given that we had the cancellation of so the ALS committee has not formally voted on its recommendation. The recommendation we've been working on is the hiring of 4 paramedics. It looks like that would in its final form, would represent a $320,000 increase in the fire department budget. About a $60,000 increase in the townwide insurance and workers' comp budgets, and about a $20,000 increase in the long-term obligation for OPEB and the long-term retirement-based benefit. So in round numbers, it adds about $400K to the town's costs, distributed 320, 60, 20. And it generates $150K in revenue, so the net impact on the town for ALS service is $250K. The revenue is conservatively estimated. We didn't take any overtime benefits into account, so I think we tried to estimate, not in a pessimistic, terrible disaster way, but we didn't sugarcoat it. The committee has not voted on that. My sense is that not all members of the committee are automatically going to vote in favor of it, based on the things that have happened outside of the committee over the past several weeks. So there's a possibility There'll either be a minority report, or I don't know what it'll look like. But I believe that the main majority of the committee will go with this recommendation. So I told Tom that. He said, would it be okay if we vote on that? I said, yeah. I said, you know, for my best guess right now is cut it down the middle for what the FY19 request would be. So it'd be a $160,000 increase in the fire department budget and $75,000 coming in on the revenue side, just because I'm not any smarter than to assume we'll get about half a year's worth out of it. So we agreed they would vote on it, kind of contingent upon the ALS study committee coming back with something that looks like that and not radically different. So our committee is assuming that we're going into town meeting with not having the warrant committee's recommendation. And as I've already told you guys, our charter was to come up with the most cost-effective option. It wasn't really to be necessarily an advocate, other than to try to come up with the best option for ALS services. So that's going to be out there. It's as Jack Wolf and I have talked, it's an insurance policy that has a price tag. Price tag's lower than the price tag was last year, and the taxpayers can decide whether they want to pay that price tag for ALS services or they don't.
I had a very dramatic call from a resident this past week about her experience with ALS and the dramatic difference it made in her husband's life. She also had issues about which hospital she got taken to, which disturbed them. But it's they're clearly,
I think I got the same call.
yeah, probably.
It's the polarizing issue. And, some people don't want to spend any money. Some people think saving a life, there's no limit to what we should pay.
Yeah.
And I think I understand it as an override. I think it's appropriate as an override as opposed to, it would have been nice if it would fit it in, but I think that's an appropriate item to have as an override.
But the weather may bump you back again.
Hmm?
The weather may bump you back again.
Well, I think it will, but given, and unfortunately, the next date we have for a meeting is the 28th, which will be the day after the warrant committee, the day after the public hearing, and then we'll be after that. So that's kind of why I think that what I'm giving you is an 80 to 90% accurate picture of where we'll wind up, I think.
Thank you.
Yep.
Our next agenda items are the licenses and permits, which is a consent agenda, but I see that Liz Sandeman is here. And did you want to present on your request since you're here in person?
Sure, just a minute.
Sure, please.
So Liz has learned to sign up for citizen comments, so she doesn't have to sit through all this until 9 o'clock.
Hello, Liz Sandman, Medfield resident. For the last couple of years, Medfield's graciously agreed to hang the Donate Life flag during the month of April, which is National Donate Life Month. And we hang it in the hall of the downstairs lobby on one of the desks. So I'm here to ask if we can hang this flag, which is the Donation Saves Lives flag, to raise awareness during April Donate Life Month.
So is that the very flag that went to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro?
No, that flag had my donors' names on it.
Oh,
So, yeah, it's not good. This would have been, but Sharpie started bleeding, so I had to use a different material flag to take with me.
Wonderful.
do you want to make a motion?
Sure, I would make a motion that we grant permission to place the Donate Life flag in the reception area of Town Hall.
Second.
Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor? Yes.
Is there a time period on that, or is it?
It's the month of April. Yeah.
Did you need Mark Sorrell to hold it up?
Thank you very much.
Board of Selectmen.
Thanks, Liz.
Let's see, how about a motion for the rest of the consent agenda?
I would move that we grant the other licenses and permits on the consent agenda as set forth thereon.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. And then, town administrator update.
The storm, their latest projection was 8 to 10 inches. We'll have to see what we come. I did talk to Mo. He thinks we're about $100,000 over on the snow budget right now. before this storm. So I upped the budget figure I have for snow deficit from 100 to 125,000.
Out of free cash.
And out of free yeah, it comes out of free cash.
But we have to
actually-
tax for it next year.
Actually, it comes out of next year's tax levy, yeah. I think they did a tremendous job the past 4 storms, keeping us, our roads clean and free of brush, so. The warrant committee met last night and voted on several of the articles and budgets. They expect to be done with the budgets next week, their action on the budgets, and pretty close to finishing up on the warrant articles. Do you people have the warrants? I have a couple of extras here if you don't have them with you.
Still
Do
the
you
March
need-
6th draft?
The what?
The March 6th
Yes.
draft?
Capital budget, they haven't got the final figures from you, from the capital budget committee on
No,
that?
we had a discrepancy in the figures last night, but we worked it out today.
Okay.
Were we right about that, Kristen? Was it-
I voted that you and I were right about it, yes.
That's all I need.
Article 14 for the Park and Rec project manager and architect, they voted that, approved that by or recommended it by a 5-4 vote. Project manager and architect for the addition of the center, they are not recommending that. Article 16, appropriate funds for advanced life support, they are not recommending that. I believe they've already acted on the state hospital redevelopment remediation. I'm not sure if they've acted on Article 18, that's the cultural use of the state hospital. I'm not positive about that one. They did not approve Articles 20 through 23, those are the housing petitions. And I think they felt that there was a problem with Article
I think they were a yes
19,
on,
that it was unnecessary, that it already was under the selectmen's jurisdiction.
yeah, I think they were no on 19 to 22. I think they were a yes on 23. They were a yes on 23 because it was sort of a non-binding
Into the redevelopment.
resolution
Okay.
of,
24 they were okay with, 25 they voted no, that's the liability insurance or the funding. Actually, what they
deferred that, didn't they defer that?
they might have deferred.
I think they
the,
deferred 25.
The lease, the ability of the selectmen to lease the property, but I believe they had planned to meet with Christian,
Yeah.
and they're gonna meet with him next week, I believe.
I think the proponents had suggested that maybe they would pay for the insurance. So the warrant committee wanted to take that into account.
Yeah.
So they were in favor of authorizing us to lease it,
I don't think
but
they
not
voted,
I don't think
funding?
so.
I don't think they voted on it.
I think
Okay.
they
They
just
were gonna
wanted
find
more
out what the
information,
funding thing
yeah.
was to get, they had some more questions about it. They're meeting on Monday.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Article 26, the chief had told them that he didn't, he had got some preliminary estimates. It was going to be over $1 million to do all the traffic lights and
Wow.
lane changes and everything for this is for the intersection of North Meadows and West Street. And so they're recommending that we not appropriate funds for it, but that we try to work with Representative Garlick and maybe get some design funds from the state budget to do a design for it, and then try to get the money to pay for the improvements next year. So they're withdrawing that, other than they may keep it to give the selectmen the ability to apply for grants and loans and whatnot. Article 27, the pre-disaster mitigation plan update, they approved that. Bylaws and permits, that's approved. The two, I believe they've approved both of the easements. And Article 31, that's a routine one, transfer sewer betterment paid in advance sewer stabilization fund. And then transfer the balance of the loan from stabilization to the ambulance revolving fund. That's 20,000. That 20,000 will come out of the ambulance loan revolving fund and go into stabilization. So that will increase stabilization by 20,000. That's in addition to the 200,000 that we're putting in from the stabilization budget. The OPEB, I think they felt that they wanted to do at least a minimum of 400,000.
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
So I think they're gonna drop that from the 480 to the 400. The water enterprise removal and the painting the Mount Nebo water tower, I believe, Jeremy, they were meeting with, are you gonna meet with the warrant committee? Did you have scheduled a meeting?
I believe it has been.
Between snowstorms? Okay, so I think they're holding that until they get further information, but they're, okay, the marijuana not medically prescribed, they voted to recommend that. That's just a confirmation of what the voters in the town meeting did last year. Bylaws on the, to define the composition and duties of the permanent planning building committee, they're recommending that. Mike Quinlan met with him last night on that one and went over it. Dog control, I think they're still up in the air somewhat about that. They were, do you recall? I think they were.
They voted it.
They voted it, but they had some concerns about it, I thought. But
Did you tell him Mark wrote it?
the what?
Mark was there.
Mark was there, yeah. It was getting late, maybe they did vote it, I don't know. The zoning, I don't think they voted on the zoning, did they?
No.
They're holding off on that one. Community Preservation Act,
They didn't vote on it last night. I don't know if they voted on it before or not.
yeah, I think they were. And the stabilization fund, they didn't vote on that. They didn't vote on any of the last three.
Yeah.
Well, the free cash, they haven't voted on, so the last four. So that's about where they stand. Yes. Yeah, they're meeting at, I think 6, was it 6 o'clock? They're gonna meet? 17, yeah. Well, there's the warrant hearing. Oh, that's Tuesday night, yeah, okay. Okay, I think, last meeting, you people went over signing the articles. I don't know if you want to start taking positions on any of the articles. It probably should. If you're ready to vote to recommend or dismiss or take no action. I think the first 2 through 9 are, or 2 through 8 certainly are fairly routine. The 4 medical bill, the 4.
Well, can I make a suggestion on this, Mike?
Yep.
I mean, we have, to Gus's point, we have a number of overrides, including potential for an operating override, just a general operating override as part of this. And I think it's going to be hard, at least from what I heard from what Gus saying, it's going to be hard for us to take a position on some of these things without having a picture of the whole thing. And I think, I know that the school committee had authorized Jessica to work with us on the language of the override, the outcome override. And I'm happy to do that with them, unless one of you wants to take that on. I'm happy to do it, so that we can try to get together, to have a number, so that we know what the number is going to be. Because we have to, on our side, I know, Mike, you still think that there may be some need for part of that override to cover town operating budgets. And so we need to come to a judgment ourselves as to whether we're going to support town operating budgets that would require an override. So,
There's an override even for the operating budget?
I think on the town side, it's primarily what do we call that, the employee benefit cost, pension, health insurance,
And that alone was enough,
unemployment insurance.
the growth in that was enough to drive the total town over?
Well, we budget those separately. We budget town, school, and then we budget employee benefits. So that's really a separate category. But that alone, yeah, they were, the health insurance was up 9.13%, I think. The pensions are up about 9.8%. Unemployment insurance was up 67%.
It just always seemed like in the past, the town departments somehow or another managed to, by not growing as much as 2.5%, they effectively subsidize those kinds of things. But what you're saying is that growth on those accounts is,
Yeah, well.
like, we don't have, I don't think we have any town departments that are blowing through the budgets. It's just,
But I think in raw numbers, that's something like a $450,000
in the,
health insurance
yeah,
budget.
yeah,
Right. So if your Prop 2.5 is a new growth total, it's at 1.5 million or something. And so I think that number, it depends on the school budget, and then it also depends on how much free cash we're willing to use in this budget in terms of the size of the override.
Yeah.
And so, we kind of have to come to a number on that. And so I can work with Jessica on that to try to come back here next week, maybe,
Yeah.
and say, look, here's where we think the number is. And then what I'd like to try to do on all of this is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to sort of pick a override number that's almost going to guarantee having to have another one next year to maintain the same level of service. And so I'd like this to get to a point where the number is something that we can assure taxpayers that we're not going to be back next year for another one.
which budgets are you talking about?
It's mostly the school budget. I mean, obviously, that's the biggest budget and has the largest growth component to it. And so I'd like us to try to get to that point from not a 10-year planning process, but at least to be able to say, here's a number that coupled with ordinary Prop 2.5 growth, we won't have to be back next year for an override. At least I think that should be our goal, anyway. But we can talk further about that as we go ahead. But I'll try to work that out with Jessica and Chris and report back on that.
The only reaction I have to that was that the school committee meeting at the in the auditorium, what, a month and a half, 2 months ago, I did take note when Chris Morrison mentioned that, well, we've got issues this year, but we have structural issues, and we're going to be back next year. So that raised a real alarm bell for me.
I think what we're trying to do is really, there's many things that we're trying to do in town is really anticipate our costs. And we have been underfunding and unable to kind of keep up with population growth for having kids. Let's get to a number that really works for the schools so that we can really make sure that we're not going.
But the enrollment is still down, almost 400.
If we're getting 100 kids a summer, this is, our growth is going through the roof quickly.
Right, and I think that's ultimately the substantive discussion that we're going to have about whether we vote to put the override on the ballot or not. And so I think we, from my perspective, would like to get to the point where we're understanding what's coming down the road.
Yeah,
And so we're not-
it would help me to see those numbers, because the numbers I've seen so far don't show any.
Yeah.
They show a couple of student growth, but that's through, I thought it was through FY18.
I'll check forward
Okay.
to you,
Okay.
but obviously we'll be working on it.
Because obviously this is a teacher renegotiation year as well. And so, that contract is not going to hit this year's, but it's going to hit next year's.
We also have new bus
Budget,
contracts,
yeah.
which obviously we know, we have no power over.
And so, anyway, we'll come back with
Okay,
it, we'll talk,
okay,
and we'll
yeah.
figure out, but at least we can get to a more concrete position to know what we're dealing with. Because it would be better not to have serial overrides, one way or the other. And then the town meeting can decide if they want to do it or not. I mean, it's ultimately their judgment, and the voters' judgment, so.
The way we wrote the preliminary article for this is it's done as a contingent override. So you would vote a set of budgets that would produce a balanced budget without an override. And then then we prepared a separate article that would be a contingent, and that would list the budgets at the amount, and the amounts they were going to. And if that override passed, that would add to the original budgets. If it failed, you would stick with the original budgets. And
So the election would have those separate override, people would vote separately on each of the overrides?
now, they would list them and they would total whatever the amount was.
But what if people, so that's the part, because there's so many components, this is the piece I was trying to visualize. I'm not so worried about the town meeting, because there are articles that are either gonna get passed or not. But when the election comes, where these are very different issues,
Well,
I'm trying to picture how people vote if,
You have to, you can spell out the purposes, purpose of
yeah.
purposes. But the statute specifies the form of the ballot question, and it's kind of
Yes.
fill in the blank on the purposes.
Mhm.
You probably can't get to the level of detail that you would like to.
Right, but I think, Mark, I think Gus's question, I don't mean to,
yeah, no,
is that, for example, on ALS, right? Let's say town meeting passes ALS. I think what I heard Gus say is you think that should be a separate question on the ballot from the general.
I'm trying to visualize, yeah, I'm trying to visualize it, and it's not exactly just because I'm trying to set up an ALS being able to get, I'm trying to picture people, these are issues that are so very different, and some of them, like ALS, have a polarized, just like schools will have a polarized, except the polarizations aren't going to be the same. Having those all in there could, if it's an all or nothing, I'm looking and going, that could either, I don't even know what'll happen.
Well, here's one of the problems I foresee if you have what they call a menu type override, where you vote, if you want to put money in for the school budget, you vote yes. If you want to take money out, if you don't want to put money in the library budget, you vote no, and you go down. But we're dealing with issues that are like health insurance, unemployment insurance, pension cost. So what happens if the voters vote to increase the school budget
Yeah.
and then vote no on the health insurance and on the pensions and on the unemployment insurance?
Well, I agree, because you don't really have a whole lot of choice about that.
Right, you are running up
The warrant- but
deficits
is
for
it
the
warrant
future.
committee, is it the warrant committee that would not allow that kind of a thing? That's not a discretionary, I don't know, you're asking a great question, I hadn't thought about it, but
You'd have to come back to town meeting. I mean, if that's the way it went, you'd have to come back to town meeting to revote budgets that within the limits. But Mark, I mean, with
what
respect to,
I'm saying is that the warrant committee that needs to make sure those are funded, because they're not an override is all a function of where you draw the line on which budgets and who's above water and who's below water. So if the warrant committee is is the warrant committee setting a budget for these things that's below what they actually are, is what you're saying?
No, but if, in order to prepare a balanced budget, you have to
I mean,
cut
we
back
would
on the
have to
budgets.
decide, not the warrant committee, sort of which piece of, so the way the warrant is currently set up, there's a separate article for all of the override items, right? And so the school budget would be in there.
Yeah.
We would have to decide which piece of the town budget to let into the override.
Okay,
And so
okay.
it wouldn't, while it may be driven by the health insurance, we may have to put something else in there to say, okay, if this override does not pass, we're here, it could be extra money for different departments, it could be one particular department, whatever it's gonna be. And then, because my thought is, my legal question, Mark, is, the way it's set up now is sort of the operating budget override is one article, and it's an up or down vote, right? Because the vote has to mirror the town meeting, it's gotta be a town meeting first, or after town meeting, could the selectmen decide, okay, if ALS passes at the town meeting, we're gonna put a separate override question for ALS on the ballot. In other words, which of these decisions do we have to make before town meeting, which do we have to
You
make
can
after?
you can go general or specific, and then like the ALS would be, it would be dedicated to that purpose for the first year, and then in subsequent years, it would simply go to general revenues.
Right.
So that's,
But the
so
way the
you can
warrant is-
specify in that
But
regard.
my question is, I know you can, the
Yeah.
way the warrant is currently constructed, can we do that?
Well, the warrant you can, because people are gonna vote on it.
No, I know, but I'm talking about for the override. In other words, do you have to have a vote at town meeting? This is my question. A vote at town meeting that mirrors the override question? Or can you vote the budgets, and then after town meeting, we come back, and the selectmen put an override question for ALS on the ballot, and then we put a separate override question for the operating budgets on the ballot? In other words, do we have to do something with the warrant in
It's
order?
the motions, the warrant's okay, the warrant's
Warrant's
broad
okay.
enough.
Okay,
It'll
so-
be the motions that
Okay.
determine what your strategy is going to be.
Because I agree with Gus, that if ALS, that should be a separate override item, apart from the other operating budget.
So this is just to start to help. It sounds like if there's a school override, that would be its own thing.
Doesn't have to be, it depends whether they, what you decide on.
Okay, okay.
Look at Article 45.
Right.
And the way that's worded, it prohibits adding the following month's fiscal 19 operating budgets as set out below. So you list the budgets and the amount you were gonna add to them, and then total them up, and you would vote the total appropriation. And it would be a contingent appropriation, it would be contingent upon passage of a Proposition 2.5 operating override.
And in that case, the ballot question would at least generally reflect what the town meeting had done. Maybe not to the level of description, but at least for the purposes.
So let me, if the I'm just trying to paint a picture of what that ballot looks like. If there were stabilization fund, that would be its own, because that's a unique kind of override. So that one's gonna show up for sure.
Yes. And Article 45, that would show up in the individual budgets. And if you wanted to do an ALS one, you have an article to appropriate funds for ALS. So you would do that as a contingent override. You would appropriate funds at town meeting, subject to passage of a Proposition 2.5 override.
So, yeah, but then when that passage of the Prop 2.5 over, so my whole question was, on the ballot, only because there's so many pieces that could all contribute to the town's operating budget override, that's gonna bring different configurations of supporters and detractors on particular things. And I'm just trying to picture how
Have you
that
looked
shows
at
up on
this?
this. I have, yeah.
Because they get all kinds of examples.
Well, I know
of
that.
this and
That's
that.
where my head was going, is
And
every,
it's a choice. You
Okay.
have to decide
and it'll be
what
our
you
job
want,
to.
right.
Okay.
You could do the override vote for Article 45 as each item
Yeah.
on your vote separately, and if it fails, that budget fails, but the other one doesn't. But that's the danger that you run into. You know, people will vote for the school budget, but they won't vote for unemployment
Well, but
insurance, so they won't.
Well, so that's why I don't think that's one that should show up as an override item.
Well, that's when you have to, because that's where the excess.
No, that's what I'm
funds-
saying, is it's up to us to decide what's listed there from the town side. So we
Yeah,
can say, look, we
yeah.
have to put health insurance in, we gotta put it in,
Yeah.
and then if that override doesn't pass, we're not gonna cut.
I mean,
we're not gonna
I'm
cut
just
health
off the
insurance
top of my
because
head,
it's illegal.
I
We would have whatever else we're gonna put in.
I would
there.
think you could
This has
have-
to, you might have to equal the health insurance amount,
Yeah.
in other words, and then if it doesn't pass, it's those other budgets that get hit.
I would think you could have general language under the purposes that would say to supplement the operating budget as voted at the 2018 annual town meeting, and have a lump sum and not have to break it out.
But what I'm getting at is that if you do that, the first thing, if it's a lump sum, including the schools and ALS, you've got constituencies all voting on a single question. And it could go either way. You could get a constituency voting on one question and destroy, and turning everything down because that's the only way they can block something. Or it could be constituencies winding up agreeing to a much higher number than they actually really wanted for the parts that they really wanted on the override. So, and I'm just trying to picture it. And so, to your point, there are options in that on how you could structure that. My thinking would be the right way to do it, given what I think will be this conglomeration of override items, is probably to let people do that. So that if people are in support of the schools, but they don't want ALS, they can vote that way.
Well, they could do that for they could do that for the balanced budget. And they could do it for this, where they're appropriating the funds to at town meeting,
Yeah, I'm talking about at the election.
at the election.
I guess my view, Gus, would be, for new things should be separate. And that
Yeah.
increases to old budgets, I would be inclined to put all of it into the one vote for existing operating budgets that have to go up, rather than, have,
Yeah.
an
That-
override for
I can see that.
$11,000
I
for
can
the
see-
library,
yeah,
an override
yeah.
for
Well, no, I
$6,200.
agree with you. The only issue would be if there's like building projects, like, in other words, operating budgets, I agree with you, Brian.
So I could
And
see
even
the
though ALS technically would be an operating budget, I actually could see that potentially being separate, because it's a new service. It's a new service.
And that does have a separate article on the warrant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I could see it being.
I'm not trying to break down the departments of the operating
No,
budget.
sort of operating budget override, ALS, whatever we do on capital, and then whatever happens with Parks and Rec. And is Parks and Rec, are they intending to do this as debt, or how are they intending to pay for their OPM? Or is it their revolving fund?
Last night, yeah.
Is it their revolving fund, or?
No, I don't think so.
So they're planning to borrow?
$300,000.
$300,000.
15,000.
What?
350, I think it was.
So they plan to borrow it, or they're gonna spend it, pay for it? I thought the suggestion was they weren't gonna pay for it themselves. I don't know, Jessica, do you remember what
I
how
don't.
they said?
I was grabbing chocolate.
I might have missed the,
It was so surprised when the vote went away.
yeah, I mean, maybe they're,
We were talking about.
330 is a low number to borrow, but maybe that's their,
Discussion around it.
yeah. So, maybe they were so surprised that they didn't think what it was gonna be. Yeah.
The other way, which I'll get all hackles all up, is they could vote it out of the stabilization fund, which we don't want to do. That violates your policy right there.
We don't have a policy, so it doesn't violate anything. I mean, I think that's, so you'd really then have 3 operating overrides. Operating budgets, ALS, and then if the capital stabilization thing makes it through, then potentially, however, Parks and Rec, I mean, I'm assuming it's debt, but we should know that.
Yeah, I've been looking ahead for the election on this thing for a while, and I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to think, what's the responsive way to structure it to where the taxpayers actually get to vote what they think. It feels like it's gotta be a couple pieces, but I don't think you break out separate departments in the operating budget.
Right.
It's just the operating budget.
Can we go back to talking about Lot 3?
The night is young, Mike. We're not even at 10 o'clock yet, and we're like running out of things to talk about.
How many hours at spring been?
But are we done on this one, Mike? Just, Gus, I mean, to your point about the hospital and getting that moving and what we need to do, obviously I agree with that entirely. They're coming in next week, right? So, no?
We're not ready.
Well, can we put it on our agenda for next week after the warrant hearing? Well, they don't have to come, but we can talk about it. We can talk about how to do that and all of that. They're welcome to come, obviously, but, after the warrant hearing, we should do that. And then we should also have for our meeting next week as well, kind of the capital stabilization issues and fun, because that'll come up with the warrant hearing as well. We should have that back on our agenda for next week. With respect to, Mike, I'm sorry, I jumped in here, but do you have more stuff on anything?
No, but the only thing is, next week you only have about a half an hour meeting, because your meeting starts at 7 and the warrant hearing starts at 7:30.
Yeah, we'll pick up after the warrant hearing.
I'll say there's 5 more hours till midnight.
Yeah. I mean, that's- the warrant hearing usually lasts no more than an hour, so we can plan to pick it up again after. That's what typically is
So you'll adjourn with the intention of
of
resuming.
resuming, and
All
then,
depends on the weather
Well,
report.
they've
for
actually
that.
made a commitment not to read the articles verbatim this year.
yeah.
I get such a kick out of the zoning ones.
Then with respect, just one other scheduling issue, I think John Kelly's on for April 3rd to come in. So I think it looks like the weather's gonna cooperate with my committee and not with yours, Gus. So, we'll meet on Thursday for an Affordable Housing Trust Board recommendation on Kelly and then back in on April 3rd. Just thinking of other scheduling stuff, any other scheduling stuff we need for next week's agenda? Because the warrant's gonna go to print soon. I volunteered to draft the selectmen's report for the town report again, so I'll draft that and circulate it to you guys.
Okay.
If there's anything you think should be in there, in particular, email me and I'll make sure to include it in the report. Anything else we need to have for next week? But, all right,
If you think of it, just let me know.
okay.
We'll get on it, but we'll be posting next week's meeting on Thursday, so.
Yeah, yeah.
Selectmen report?
Oh, sure. In happier news, so I went and saw the high school production of Pippin a couple of weeks ago, which was really great. I've got to say, I'm much more of a Gilbert and Sullivan, Rodgers and Hammerstein kind of guy, but it was really well done. The kids are fantastic. It was funny. It was great. And then the next night, Pete and I were at the Blue and Gold banquet for Pack 113.
113.
Pack 113. Entertainment.
Compared to the other pack.
It was earlier. The food was by Cutlets.
It was very early, yeah.
4 to
o'clock,
7. The
that's a
other one was
little
6 to 9. The entertainment was provided by Personal Best Karate, which was good, and it was great. It's always we just have such a remarkable scouting tradition in this town. It's amazing to see kind of the next generation coming
They were
along.
graduating a lot of kids to the Boy Scout troop, too.
Yeah,
Like a
yeah,
dozen or something.
it was really impressive. And then I think you've gotten a full report on the warrant committee meeting from last night. That I was there, Mike was there, and others were there as well. So it was a good turnout. Good turnout for that. And they're meeting again on Monday. I don't think there's anything that came up last night that we need to talk about. I think they do want. The one thing I think they do want a stronger view from the selectmen on the dog article. And I was courageously trying to avoid taking a position on it whatsoever at the meeting, because we are the enforcing body under the revised bylaw, and so
Did they have any particular?
Yeah, I mean,
Something like the dog, Mark writes the dog bylaw, it's like, it's gotta be one I don't have to spend a lot of time on, but what were the concerns?
you just need to understand that in the context, there's a statute that has usually the extreme authority. You can order a dog euthanized if it's determined to be a vicious dog. That's really extreme, obviously. So the purpose of the local bylaw is to provide you with options short of that. So that if you actually, hopefully those work, but if they don't, at the point where you get to that, you are well justified. You've tried everything else and it didn't work. So that's why I've written the bylaw. You have the right to restrain dogs. You have the right to, on their property, you have the right to muzzle dogs. And as I indicated to the warrant committee last night, I took care to just put in the extra procedures. I didn't mess with the existing, like, what the leash law covers and doesn't. There was a provision that the committee was tossing around about prohibiting dogs on certain properties. I didn't mess with that either. So I just took what we already had and added this procedure.
I was just trying to get a sense of where the warrant committee was coming from in terms of.
Their concern is there's one provision about nuisance dogs, which is basically continuously making noise that disturbs people. And I think they finally, the contact person, Joanna Hilbert, who's an attorney, had come around to basically this discretion of the animal control officer. Even if neighbors are raising hell, it's gonna be her call whether or not to fine somebody or take some action if the dog's doing that, but at least this gives her the authority if she makes that determination.
Did you ever address the issue of what it means to be under the control of the owner?
No, because that's the leash law. I left that alone. What was proposed by the committee was the dog would have to be on an 8-foot leash at all times. There were no exceptions to that. The existing leash law provides for the dog being under voice control. That I could see as a very controversial debate at town meeting. I didn't go there. I left the existing. So if the dog's under voice control, you're okay.
I'm just trying to visualize what guidance from kids, whether we're supposed to be more draconian or more understanding or.
The sense I got from Joanna is that I think they want to know that we're comfortable with how it's written and that we'll be able to effectively implement it.
Oh, okay.
I think that's the sense that I get of their question, that since we're the body who's going to have to make determinations about how annoying the barking really is. Right? That we were comfortable that it's written in such a way that we'll be able to effectively and non-arbitrarily assess the annoyance level of
So are
certain
we
barking.
comfortable with the authority Mark's bylaw vests in the of course?
So, one of my favorite observations, Gus, was the first year that I was a selectman, the schools announced that we needed 3 new schools for $56 million, and I thought, gee, that's a lot of money. I better figure this out. So I went to meetings about every week or two for a year and figured it out. And the most people that showed up at any of those meetings was about 100 people, big meetings. But then Rocky Wood shortly thereafter banned dogs. 250 people showed up at Rocky Woods about dogs. And I realized where priorities were. So I've always thought that if we wanted to have a sure quorum at town meeting, we'd always put a dog article on every year.
When I was in Arlington, they had a dog complaint, and the owner hired ropes and gray to represent the dog.
Well, we had a dog that came in here with an attorney once. It was
There's
That was the
there's
airport-
a
the
cottage
airport dog,
industry,
yeah.
attorneys, that's what they do. Particularly again, when you're talking about potential euthanizing, because the new law does not, the one thing the legislature prohibited was what towns used to do, which was to ban the dog, or banish the dog,
This
so it becomes somebody else's problem. Yeah, right.
bomb sniffing dog from the
dog-
airport.
The dog
State
was
police
challenged
were
by
here.
somebody's dog off their property, and the bigger dog was a German Shepherd or something, just took him out. Yeah, that was a nasty one.
Anything in your selectmen's report?
Actually, I have, well, a couple things. One, the senior housing survey is proceeding apace where it's very close to being finalized. There was some discussion at one point of possibly needing some more money for the follow-up, and I think that's not gonna happen, so within the budget that they've got, it looks like there'll be room to do like a reminder postcard. We're actually meeting tomorrow to kind of, there always seems to be a couple issues that get thrown out by people and then they don't go away, and so we're meeting tomorrow presumably to close everything out. Barbara sent the survey to the printer for like a proof copy, so we're at the point where that's almost ready. And I think the plan was to have it go out after Easter, just to avoid the Easter holiday. I'm not sure exactly how long the response time will be. There was 2 weeks was thrown out by one person as a standard, but it's Barbara and Dick are the ones that will figure that out, working with the vendor. So it's very close to being ready to go. I think we'll get some good information out of it. And yeah, I think we'll get some good information, but I can't tell you what I think that information is going to be because there's been a little bit of informal testing and some of the responses have been a little surprising. So we'll see where that goes.
The other thing I think they said they were gonna do initially was only gonna go to households where everyone was 55 and older.
No, it's going to any, if there's anybody that's 55 and older,
And that
it's,
has several hundred households.
right, it will be at the household level. I mean, some are single, some are couples, and there's probably not more than 10 households that have three, or there were like 1 or 2 that had 4. And some of them are duplex. It's interesting to go through the addresses and names and figure out, is it everybody in one place or are there 2, learn a little more about the town. And the only 2 groups that were dropped off was Tilden Village and the Thomas Upham House. And it was 2028. It was more households than we expect. We thought 1,500. It's like 2,028 households, so.
That's about 40%.
Yeah, so the idea was, originally there was gonna be a follow-up mailing, so if they didn't come in, they were gonna have a second one. We basically got rid of that. We're figuring with that many households, there'd probably be a pretty good response. It would be a reminder postcard, but that would be cheaper than actually having the vendor target specific. So there was one of the ways to save money on that. And we'll see what comes in. I think that was the only item I had there. I have 2 items that I was gonna ask us to act on. One of them's a follow-up. I was just curious about I need to distract Mike away from lot number 3 and bring up the Rockwood basketball hoop agreement. I had it as some, you know, I carry these in my book until the issue goes away. And I've had this sitting here and going, have we ever signed the agreement? And so what's the status on where we're
I
at?
submitted drafts to you, I submitted drafts to
I haven't seen
the
it, I never saw a draft.
abutters, and I
never
had
saw
no
a draft.
response back.
Because I never saw a draft.
Well, it was that night, it was,
I don't think I even got one that night.
Could you email it to us, Mark? Did you get a response from the abutters?
no, that's more important, really, frankly,
Yeah.
'cause-
Okay. Well, let me.
Actually, I had a correspondence, I don't know if you would talk to Mo, or he did this on his own, but he and I conversed about this earlier. And I got the impression maybe he was gonna follow up with the abutters. I don't even have the contact information.
I think he was hoping you were going to do that.
I don't have it, I don't even have their names or anything, so.
I'm sure he can give you that.
I have some of their names.
It was like one, I guess, it's actually the property owner.
Yeah, I can track them down.
See, sometimes it feels like when you're the Board of Selectmen, it's like Captain Picard on the Enterprise, make it so number one, and then it's like, but number one didn't do anything.
Well, I
It's
mean,
like-
I've been, you know, if I've been,
All of us,
if the decision was that night, you know, do it, it would have been done, but it was kinda left in.
Yeah, so anyway, the point was, it's been sitting in my notebook, and I said, gee, this thing hasn't gone away yet, and obviously, I'm glad I asked the question. The second request I had, I don't think there's a pressing need, because I think we're gonna get snowed out tomorrow, but when I was trying to get the ALS study committee to be able to meet, tomorrow was the one night prior to the public hearing that most of the committee could make it. The only issue was Chad was coming up on an Amtrak train from New York, and Brendan had to call in. So my guess is the meeting's not gonna take place, although we haven't officially postponed it yet, because I'm waiting, I wanna see the snow before I do it. The only issue was, the relaxed rules for a meeting allow people in the committee to call in, but in order to do this, so correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, but if you have a quorum of the committee physically present at the meeting, and certain committee members cannot be there, but would like to call in, or video conference in, that is now allowed, so long as you take roll call votes on any votes that are taken, I think is kind of the basic ground rules.
And you have to have audio so that
Everybody's gonna-
everybody can hear
Yeah,
on both ends, so you have to buy a unit, get a unit for the
So,
meeting space.
but Mark told me in order to do that, the Board of Selectmen although it's allowed, the Board of Selectmen actually have to vote to approve that option for running meetings. So I'm here with a request that we approve, in a general sense, that we would approve the possibility for a committee to allow one of the committee members to call in remotely for a meeting, so long as they comply with the rules around physical quorum and,
I mean, I think you have to put that on an agenda and have it properly posted and then vote on it.
that wouldn't do me any good for tomorrow.
Could we put it on an agenda for a meeting next week and ratify the actions of committees taken by conference calls? Nunc pro tunc.
You know,
There's a legalese for you there, Mike, just
every
those little
time-
legalese.
Every time you try to, you know,
The reason I'm asking is because I sent this in a few days ago and said we need to discuss this. So other things seem to get on the agenda in red. This one did, and I thought it was a pretty straightforward thing because it was a discretionary action by the selectmen. I don't know if there's
Once you do it, you have to do it for every
Yes.
single board in town?
you have to it's not just a vote, you have to establish a policy, what the local policy is gonna be, so it's a little more complex, under the AG's regs.
I have no idea what you just told me. So what would a policy look like?
Well, for instance, Franklin only allows one person to call in on a first time, whoever signs up first, that's who's allowed to call in. So you have discretion as to how you're going to have it operate. You can do it on a very simple, straightforward basis, but even that, I think, needs to be on an agenda and properly voted, because, you know, you're dealing with a controversial topic, And if you try to cut corners, somebody's gonna call, invariably gonna call the Attorney General's office, and we're gonna turn this into a,
Who makes the decision? I mean, if you're not doing a posted meeting, can the chairman be designated to?
What?
It's a posted meeting. The only issue,
No, the meeting where they vote is, but when,
let's vote on this.
let's say you can't make a selectmen's meeting. How do you get the authority to participate remotely?
you call the
You
chair,
chairman.
well, actually, ironically, that's a violation in and of itself, but I think that they have loosened up, they've loosened up the criteria for hardship. You, basically, if there's some valid reason why you can't make it, then the chair authorizes you to be able to call it. You have to contact the chair in advance of the meeting, explain the circumstance, and then the chair makes a determination based on what he or she has heard from that person, whether or not to allow him to.
But in order to do that, the Board of Selectmen have to approve
That's a
that.
preliminary, that's right. We had a discussion on this at the time it became authorized. At that time, that existing board didn't feel it was warranted, and it would have perhaps unanticipated consequences with other boards and commissions besides the Board of Selectmen. So it was
Mark, when I
determined not to do it.
emailed you a couple of days ago and asked what we needed to do, and you sent me the email back and said that the Board of Selectmen needs to approve this option.
Right.
And then if we had said, well, then let's put it on today's agenda, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now for a meeting tomorrow, which probably won't take place. But it's gonna screw everything up if I can't have the meeting because I can't hold the vote that I'm having the meeting for, that I was trying to get lined up through this vote this evening.
Well, it's obviously a breakdown in communication, but typically I would not be directing anybody to put anything on an agenda. That's not my.
Can we get this on the agenda next week so that we can have a vote?
Now,
So
just,
that
I mean,
If this comes up again, I don't have to cancel a meeting because I can't have the vote that I've been trying to get for 2 weeks. Because we have such an efficient set of rules for how government must operate, we make sure you can't get things done. Great.
so Gus,
I'm happy now.
with respect to that meeting, you
I'm
need,
so happy.
Chad is the issue, right? Because he's the one who's the member of the committee. You have to.
And
have him.
Tom had to step down for understandable reasons, so we have 6 voting members, and I'm trying to get a vote so that we can actually come out somewhere. Now, I actually don't think I'm gonna be able to have a meeting, because chances are it's gonna be a snowstorm, and we're gonna do it on the 28th. So where I was thinking it was bad that we weren't getting our meeting in before the selectmen's meeting, this is actually gonna work out perfectly for next week, as long as you please put that on the agenda. Thank you.
Speaking of snowstorms, Chris, I believe Thursday is the bid opening for the bridge, the Phillips Street Bridge. That could be canceled, or if they can't get the bids in, they may have to delay that. But
So Gus, is that all of your report then?
You want more?
So I would just mention that I went to another one of those 6-town meetings, and I find those hugely informative and interesting. There was a start at the discussion about how to run annual town meeting votes. A couple of the towns, Holliston and Ashland, advocated holding colored cards up, it was easier to vote. The woman that we met at the Millis Selectmen at the annual MMA meeting is pushing to have electronic voting and maybe have all the towns share the cost of it, and then move it around from town meeting to town meeting so that we just share the cost. I don't know exactly how that works, but it sounds good. There was an interesting discussion about budgeting process. Medway apparently has leadership meetings on a regular basis. Millis does the same thing. FinCom and Board of Selectmen and the schools meet on a regular basis. There was a discussion about economic development directors. Both Medway and Ashland said absolutely hire them. They make more than they cost you in grants that they bring in. Centralized town services, IT, human resources and facilities. Next meeting is June 7 o'clock in Medway, the Thayer House. Second thing is that I went to a meeting where they were discussing autonomous vehicles. The interesting takeaway from that was that when we start having autonomous vehicles, we're gonna actually have more vehicles on the road, because people are gonna go to dinner, and instead of paying for parking, they're gonna tell their car to drive around. So there'll be these things called zombie cars. They're just gonna be driving around the block.
What will that do to their carbon footprint?
Yeah, not good.
Due to the center intersection we have in town.
I thought that was a fascinating,
They can all just
unintended
go to the hospital and
consequence.
just drive around the property.
Yeah. The Medfield Foundation, volunteer awards are coming up, and the people were selected for recognition. Kim Agricola for her work with the Medfield Animal Shelter, Chris Allen for the sound engineer of over 20 years of annual town meetings. Tony Santori is a volunteer of the year, along with Susan Holbrook. Tony for his work with mainly for housing for the seniors. Susan for her work with the UCC and the Cradles to Crayons. And Jack Morrill is the youth volunteer of the year for, he seems to do a lot of things. And that's pretty much it. So then we've got informational things. Anything there, Mike, that you wanted to, on your informational list, that you wanted to highlight to people before we go into executive session?
Do you have my executive session card, Mark?
Oh, did you guys remind everybody about the downtown parking study too? The survey's due March 26th.
Downtown, which study?
Downtown
Parking
parking
Parking.
survey study, since it's recorded, maybe yours March 26th.
Okay,
I
thank
completed
you.
mine.
Me too.
Me too.
Good. Excellent.
The North Meadows Road project that, the notice of the April 12th meeting, that's the one next to the Goddard School, I believe. And then there's there's a brochure in there about an upgrade that's being proposed by the Tri-County Vocational School. They have decided, instead of going with a $60–70 million total upgrade, they're going to try to do it under, I believe, what's called a rapid repair program that the School Building Assistance has, where they're going to apply to because the school has been well maintained, and they feel that if they would have trouble getting all the towns to vote for an override. Whereas this is $12,700,000 spread among the towns, so they feel they would have a better chance, and they would upgrade the school, the HVAC and the roofing systems and all the things that need to be replaced after 50 years on the school is.
They haven't been putting aside money for maintenance, obviously.
They did, actually, that's one of the reasons they only have to spend $12,700,000 instead of $60 million.
Oh, okay.
So this is money they'll be coming out to the towns looking for support for, or is this what they're getting covered by the state?
Well, it depends on how much they get in the grant. It may be one of those where they get a 50% grant. They put it around.
Mark, do you have the executive session?
The interesting thing is, there are two formulas. There was originally one formula, the formula for how you apportion the capital cost, and there was a formula for how you apportion student cost. And someone challenged under the education reform funding formula that should be used as the method for funding the student cost. And the courts agreed. So now Medfield pays more per student because we are considered a wealthy town, and the factors that go into calculating the cost for communities, we lose. On the other hand, on the capital costs, they stuck with the original assessment. So it's, I believe that's equal for community.
So we're done? The Medfield Board of Selectmen needs to meet an executive closed session for the following purposes: to discuss strategy with respect to litigation. I declare that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body, and to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real estate. And I declare that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body.
I move that the Medfield Board of Selectmen go into executive session for the following purposes: to discuss strategy with respect to litigation, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body, and the chair has so declared, and to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body, and the chair has so declared, and that the open session shall not reconvene at the conclusion of the executive session.
Second.
Roll call. Mr. Murby.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Marcucci. Aye. Next week, Gus, you'll get to do